They forgot to hang up, and I heard the most unhinged thing. This wasn't a phone call, but happened as I was leaving a potential rental. I was looking for a place to rent. I met the property manager, and she walked me to the unit. It wasn't the best neighborhood, and my mind was already made up as I was walking around the property with her that I wasn't going to go through with it. But the lady was very nice and friendly, and I figured at least I'd take a look inside the unit. It was small and dingy. I looked around and told her nicely that I'd think about it, and then I walked out. As soon as the door closed, I could hear her screaming, "No, you fricking won't! Frick! Oh, I'll think about it and let you know, will you? Oh, frick! Frick you!" I'm certainly glad that I didn't rent from her. I left a client a voicemail and I thought I hung up, but in fact I proceeded to talk baby talk to my roommate's cat for several minutes while it was recording. Oof. My cat has a human name and I talked to him in a normal tone, so a hypothetical client would have been treated to, "Where you been, Nelson? Did you take a dump on the floor again? God damn it, we talked about this." My mother-in-law had a new boss who hated her. She was about 3 years from retirement, and she felt like he was trying to push her out early so she'd lose part of her pension and stuff. She asked me to check her answering machine while she was gone after her mother died, and let her know if anything important came in and to water her plants. The third day or so I'd been there was a message from this boss giving his condolences. Then you could hear the click where he thought he'd hung up, but he must have placed the receiver just wrong and was still on the line. He ruthlessly made fun of her with his wife for the next 5 minutes or so before saying, "Oh, frick," and hanging up. She was at a really low point in her life, and I didn't have the heart to tell her or leave the message on the machine. It would have absolutely crushed her. But I did record it, and then I deleted it from her machine. And then I called that butthole and told him what I had, why I wasn't telling her right now, but that I absolutely would if needed in the future, and I told him I'd better hear nothing but how wonderful work was going for her, and how well she was treated until she retired. I told him I didn't even understand what a piece of crap you had to be to talk about someone like that behind their back, and especially at such a time in their life. And that's exactly what happened. She had a wonderful last few years at the job and figured that her mother dying had opened him up to treat her kindly and with respect. That was 20 years ago, and I never told her and never will. I wouldn't want to ever take those last few years there away from her. I did not expect a tearjerker act of kindness in this particular topic, but there you have it. Not a dry eye in the house. Voiceover booth. Me and the no doubt countless organisms in the space I sit in for 8 hours a day applaud your humanity. It's not a crazy story, but I'd just finished talking to a client over the phone. We said our goodbyes, and then I hear her ask, "Are you wearing pants today?" I wasn't sure how to answer that, but I figured she was jokingly asking because everyone just started working from home due to COVID. And I just replied, "Yes." She burst out laughing then, trying to explain that she thought she'd already hung up, and she was actually asking her husband that question. We laughed about it for about 3 minutes before we actually hung up. I once worked as a secretary in an office that for some reason got butt-dialed a lot. During one such occasion, I got to listen in while some gentleman from New York absolutely roasted one of his employees. "Well, what the fudge do you expect me to do? Honestly, Tom, if it wasn't for the fact that I'm honestly going to town on your sister every night, your butt would be out of here right now." I worked in inbound calls and sales and had a pleasant conversation with a customer who politely declined the offer and told me she was going to look elsewhere. We said our goodbyes, nothing out of the ordinary. Really sweet lady. She'd called in with her husband. As soon as she thought she hung up, she slammed her phone down and started yelling at her husband, "F you, company name. Are you frickin' crapping me right now? $350 a frickin' year? I'm not paying that much for gosh darn garbage product. How the frick could that B-word pitch me that with a straight frickin' face?" I gave her the decency of hanging up myself after that, but she was 100% in the right being mad. She was teed off but vented about it to her husband instead of taking it out on me. I wish more people chose that route. A colleague of mine dialed into a meeting of 2 to 3 managers plus about 25 sales reps, only for everyone to suddenly go quiet and for one person to tell him the meeting was cancelled and he could drop, as they, the sales reps, were just chatting sales stuff. He pretended to hang up and stayed on the line. They were basically planning a mutiny because they didn't like that their regional manager was a woman. They had a whole strategy of how they were going to cause a massive screw-up that would cost the company a ton of money and make it look like it was her fault so she'd get fired. The dumb idiots even did the little, "Are we all in agreement?" roll call at the end. We worked in a call center, so his end of the call was recorded. Within a week, every last one of them was fired, and within a month, they were replaced very easily. I had a job where I was in a position to write off a substantial phone bill, which the customer said was because her mother was dying overseas and she had dementia and needed to hear things in her voice to believe anything, including doctor's instructions. She was heartbroken and sobbing about how if she had the kind of money to pay this phone bill, she'd have just gone back to her country because the flight would have cost less, and she was right about that. I wrote off the entirety of the phone bill. She cried like a jilted lover in a rom-com and said people like me are angels from God. After I wished her a good evening and she thought the call had ended, she says to someone in a perfectly normal voice, "Whew, can't believe that worked." I called a service provider who was supposed to order certificates of good standing from a state, and they were late in sending them over. They told me there was a delay at the state's office and gave me a new estimate. They forgot to hang up, and I heard them telling their coworker that they'd completely forgot to send in time-sensitive requests in the first place. I never used them again. I have a not muted story. WebEx, 500 people on the call, right when everyone was getting used to working remotely. Whoever set it up didn't mute the audience by default. The chaos was amazing. Dozens of people simultaneously unmuted and going about their lives, dogs barking, kids crying, kitchen utensils clanging, and the call leaders pleading for people to mute themselves. My favorite part was when they had things mostly quiet, but about 5 people were still unmuted, including one guy who thought he was muted who yelled, "Jesus frickin' Christ, people, mute your frickin' phones!" before realizing that he wasn't on mute either. They threw in the towel and ended the 1.5-hour meeting after about 15 minutes. I once sat in on a similar call with hundreds of people in government. Someone sat down, loudly sighed, and said, "Great, this'll be a giant frickin' waste of 2 hours," seconds before the speaker opened the meeting. I'll admit it's not quite the same, but my parents told me a story about a long-term house guest that was problematic and difficult. When she finally walked out the door, apparently the relief was so great that my parents and older siblings started dancing around, declaring happily, "She's gone! She's gone!" only to look up and see her standing in the doorway again. She'd come back in to retrieve her umbrella by the door and had heard everything. And that's why for many years my parents would joke, "Don't forget your umbrella," to departing guests. This one's a bit cuter. My grandparents would always call me from 2 different phones in their house so we could all talk. When they'd get my voicemail and leave a message, instead of just hanging up, they'd just keep talking to each other, from across their own house. Usually silly things like, "So, what's for dinner?" and stuff like that, but it always made me smile so much. I wish there'd been a way to keep the voicemail back then. I have a voicemail saved on my phone for this exact reason. My grandmother passed 4 years ago, but every now and then I'll open up my voicemails and I get to listen to her and my grandfather giggle with each other after leaving the message for me. "Oh shoot, Jay, hang up, I'm in the same room." It's a sentence I'll cherish forever. Last year, my job was monitoring call quality, so I'd usually listen to phone agents in real time. In one instance, there was a caller that simply wasn't understanding what was being said. After the agent got off the phone with him, there was a 3-second window where I could still hear the agent scream, "Oh Jesus, frick that guy!" I didn't mark them for it as the call had technically ended at that point. Another time where someone had placed a caller on hold, but because of how the phone system works, I could hear the agent even if the caller is hearing music. She placed the caller on hold to call her sister and plan a vacation. Business conference call. The other side had asked some pretty stupid questions, but was still poised to do $1 million worth of business with us. Thinking the call had ended, one guy in the room started calling them frickin' idiots and talking about how what they were trying to do was never going to work. They didn't say anything else, but we all heard the sound of the other side disconnecting, and they later reached out and said they were going to go in another direction. He was fired from that position, and now he has his own company in the same industry. I think he's doing just fine. Yeah, I don't think anyone could really come up with a good counter-argument as to why they deserve to keep their job after that one. Nothing that would hold up in a lawsuit anyway. I'd pay a modest amount of cash to have seen his face when they heard the receiver click, though. Grandma left me a voicemail asking for my help with stuff on her computer. She thought she'd hung up, but she didn't, and I heard her call me a frickin' B-word. I haven't really talked to her since. After a business conversation, I heard, "I don't trust those guys as far as I can throw them." I was the third party in this. A coworker failed to hang up properly after a conversation with the boss and promptly went on a very creative, expletive-laden rant about the boss and what he should do with himself. As this went on, I received a text message from the boss suggesting I should inform the coworker that she had not hung up. I got coworkers' attention and told them they hadn't hung up. Still in expletive mode, I was asked what made me think that. My response was, I got a text from the boss. That was the first time I ever saw color literally drain from someone's face. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. Don't forget to subscribe to Am I the Genius? My brother-in-law got a friendly reminder that the company could still hear him even when he puts the customer on hold. This was because he was taking a big old Mary J. pipe rip while waiting on the customer. I work at a children's hospital, and anything serious like Code Blue is called out hospital-wide over the loudspeaker by dialing a specific phone extension. There's been a few times where someone hit the hold button instead of end call, and the whole hospital gets to listen to the hold music until someone catches it. The worst or funniest, though, was a couple of weeks ago. Every single employee, parent, and child in my world-renowned children's hospital heard this poor guy scream the F word when he realized he was still on. I was in a remote work conference call which was interrupted by the unmistakable sounds of a person performing their first and second necessities on the toilet. It went on for some time, and at the moment of the flush, the meeting organizer circumspectly said, "Everyone who's not speaking, please go on mute." Suddenly, a person yelled, "Fudge!" and dropped from the call. The meeting chair was trying to be a bro, because with all the other unmuted people and mild sound of chirping birds and typing, we didn't realize who it was yet, and we'd only identified the dumb idiot by the sound of his voice and "the toilet boy is leaving the meeting" notice. Poor guy never lived it down. In the early days of Facebook, my former father-in-law was just discovering it and connecting with old friends. He was having fun seeing who'd gained weight, who got divorced, who was a millionaire now, and so on. One guy he connected with gave him his phone number, so my father-in-law calls him. He didn't answer, so he leaves a message, something like, "Hey Bill, it's been a while, just wanted to catch up, give me a call back," and gives his phone number. And then he hit the end button and jokingly said, "And I heard you got fat." He then looked down, and to his horror, the call was still active and recording the message. So it probably still sounded like, "And I heard you got fat." Oh crap, oh my god, it didn't hang up. Frick, it's still recording. Click. To my knowledge, the guy never returned that call. My friend called me for a quick question, followed by the noise of him absolutely destroying the toilet before he hung up. He was not the kind of friend to do that sort of thing, so it was hilarious. We texted them, "Make sure you wipe the walls down." I have a discount digestive system, and I take a lot of work calls while I'm on the john. Usually, I'm pretty good at muting the mic on my phone at the right time. However, one time I lost all control while talking to someone. Luckily, they found it hilarious. I was troubleshooting a problem with them, and he goes, "Looks like we're both having issues." That's one of many memories that keep me up at night. The stupid motherfricker fell for it. This was from a student's parent while I was excusing their kid from an assignment that they'd missed because their grandmother just died. She hadn't died. Still, the kid wouldn't pass the class under any circumstances because he was a complete idiot. Once I talked to his parents, I knew why. So he still failed the class even without the assignment. So I know one of us was the stupid motherfricker, just not the same person they think it is. We had a company-wide call with the new CEO at my old job. Nationwide call with multiple offices and a limit of 500 lines dialed in, all maxed out. Thousands of people listening across conference rooms and desk phones on speaker. The CEO was giving the usual spiel about how she'd improve the company and make great opportunities for all employees, would change the industry, all the usual stuff. I wasn't really buying it. I'd seen several CEOs come and go and heard the same promises. Crap work is still crap work. One person in an office 2 time zones away isn't going to improve work for me. Their only metric is to improve profit for the company. Anyway, someone somewhere forgot to mute their phone and obviously didn't believe what the CEO was peddling. You could hear their scoffs and mild curses in response to the CEO's claims. I don't know if they ever found out who it was, but they did make that call much more fun for me. In future calls, they were better about muting all of the lines when one of the executives was speaking. I had a boss take a phone call while he was going through drive-thru. Me and a female colleague were talking to him, and he told us he had to order, and then apparently forgot we were still on the line. He said the female coworker I was with was only good for her giant chest, and that she needed a good eggplant in the rear end to lose her attitude. There was someone else in the car with him, apparently. She left the company, but I hear she got a handsome severance package. I was working in a call center for some time, so I'd be calling around 30 to 40 people per day, which is exhausting work. There was this one particular call, I still remember it very clearly. It wasn't crazy, but the situation was rather unexpected. So, I'd be calling a woman about the end of her 30s, we'd have the usual chat and she was readily replying to my questions, sometimes giggling and doing conversation outside the topic at hand. She was in a room with her daughter. When we ended the chat, I thanked her for her time and said my goodbyes. A few seconds after that, she apparently thought I'd already hung up and said to her daughter, "My goodness, he's got the most pleasant voice." I was smiling beams for the rest of the day and did enjoy the work much more for the rest of the week. A doctor's office said, "Oh, F you, Dave." I don't know who Dave is, but I'm not Dave. Well, that's quite possibly the last place I'd expect to hear an unexpected swear, to be honest, although I will be forever curious about who Dave was and what he did. If you're Dave, tell us below how you wronged that doctor. You cur. Frick you, Dave. Oh, frick, I left the microphone on. I was FaceTiming my parents shortly after I started dating my now wife. I'd had quite the dry spell and hadn't dated anyone for a couple of years. So I mentioned we were dating on the call and they were happy for me. We ended it and I just put my phone down to grab something without ending the call. Apparently my mum did too because after a few seconds I heard her say, "Well, I'm glad he's finally doing the deed now." Awkward, but I'm also glad that my mum is looking out for me. I heard the opposite from mine. It was, "Oh, she'll leave him in a few months." I got back on the phone, played it cool, and was preparing for an opening to give her an earful before I got asked, "So, when are you making me a grandma?" Funny, my phone dropped the call after that. Called a tech support number for a work-related issue during COVID. The guy was clearly at home, and I could hear a dog whining in the background. He got my error code straightened out, we both said bye, but before I could hang up my phone, I heard, "Who's a good boy? Are you a good boy?" I said quietly, "Yes, I am." Then I just heard laughing and he said, "I am so sorry," and then he hung up. I wanted to hear his puppy. Oh my god, he's lovely. I wonder what his little member is like. That was a friend of my mother under her breath. I'd answered the phone and told her she wasn't home. She would have been late 40s. I was younger than you would like to think. I was leaving a message for a client about data conversion services. After I left the message, I thought I'd hung up. Guess I wasn't too familiar with my work's calling software. I started singing the Mana Mana Do 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 Do, the Jim Henson song apparently. Then I noticed I hadn't hung up. So I hung up. The next morning I came in to check the conversion voicemails, and there was a very clear and professional message left from the client. He leaves contact number and says to have a nice day. There's a short pause and then he sings the same song back in the message, picking up where I hung up when I realized I was still on voicemail. It was hilarious and it made my day. I found out I was single this way back when I was in the army. I got the chance to call my girlfriend and I took it. It was a nice call, she told me what she'd been up to and all that. We made plans for some leave that I'd be getting soon, we said goodbye and she hung up. I still had a few minutes, so I just sat there, holding the phone so the next guy wouldn't hassle me for it, when I heard the line, from a male voice, "So, when's he coming back?" "Oh, not for a couple of weeks, we have plenty of time." "You're gonna break up with him before that, right?" "Oh, of course." I hung up and I felt like crap. I ghosted her when I went on leave, later found out she had been seeing the other guy for a while. Didn't see her for years and years until one day, I was taking my kid to get pizza at a place in a strip mall, and there she was, standing next to an SUV, staring at me like she'd seen a ghost. I waved, went inside, and that was it. I sat in on a remote interview. We were in the conference room with two screens, one showing me the interviewee and the other showing us. Nearing the end of the interview, I suddenly noticed my boss had seemed to develop an unusual neck spasm. He had faced the screen, then suddenly looked to the side and then faced the screen again. At the end of the interview, as the candidate was exchanging thank yous and stuff, I leant over and asked if my boss was okay. His answer was just loud enough to be picked up by the microphone. "If you twist fast enough, you can see your own ear." Needless to say, the job offer we extended to the candidate was not accepted. I worked at a call center years ago, and a customer was kind of panting and trying to sound normal at the same time. As soon as the conversation ended, they thought they hung up and they just went full-on hardcore moaning and filthy talking with their partner and continued with what they were doing before answering the phone. What boggles my mind is the fact that he answered the phone to begin with. Okay, since this blew up, I'll tell you guys another story. This time, someone from a call center called me. Some lady called, and from her voice you could tell she was a hefty kind of gal. Her voice was the heavy breathing type when she talked. Anyway, the call ended, but I didn't press the end call button, since I assumed they would. They didn't. And this lady talked about fried liver and onions to her coworker, and the way she talked and gushed over it was downright disgusting. Like, there was a lusty element in this, folks. She said she has it at least once a day as her meal. She made slurping sounds and some kind of moaning talking about it. I have never felt so disgusted in my life listening to someone describe their food. How was your boring meeting interrupted in a completely unexpected way? We were in our weekly meeting and heard a huge boom, similar to thunder but louder and longer. Everyone ran to the window, and the car detailing shop next to us was in flames and pieces of the building were strewn about everywhere. They evacuated our building and I got the afternoon off, and miraculously, no one had died. We were having a meeting about a piece of process equipment and how we should replace it soon before it fails. Around that moment, an engineer walked in and announced that the piece of equipment in question had just failed. I caused the interruption. My dad used to be a pastor at a church when I was much younger. One night they were having a meeting about how it was important for the church to have liability insurance, particularly if someone were to get hurt on the church's property. My older brother and I were playing in the children's area with my mum when this was happening. Somehow I ended up falling onto a door frame and splitting my forehead open. My mother runs into the meeting with me while I had blood all over my face. All the elders and my dad start freaking out and we ended up going to the hospital. The church brought insurance the next day. In short, I became an object lesson on why insurance is important. We were having an all-hands meeting a couple of years ago and several people, as always, had dialed in on the phone. They ask everyone to mute themselves, of course, but someone always forgets. In the middle of our director addressing all of us, we suddenly heard a car horn on the phone, followed by, "Stay in your fricking lane." The director just stopped, laughed, and then said, "As a reminder, it's strictly against policy for any employee to use their phone while driving a car." One of the engineers was napping in the closet in the conference room and walked out of the closet mid-meeting. We were all pretty surprised. I hope that the individual in question followed the rules of comedy, straightened his tie, nodded seriously in greeting, and walked out without explaining himself further. Years ago, I was in a conference call with all of our branch offices. Maybe 14 people in the room and another dozen or so on the call. The co-owner was giving some talk, and right as he pauses, we hear over the conference speaker, "Jesus, this frickin' meeting is bullcrap." The co-owner is a very imposing gentleman, and you could tell his blood was boiling. "Who the frick said that?" he screams. There's a dead silence in the room. "Who the frick said that?" he repeats. Again, dead silence in the room and on the conference call. He eventually calmed down, even though no one admitted to the gaffe. We think one of our technicians simply forgot to mute his mic, but we were never able to figure out who it was. For the record, the meeting was actually fricking bullcrap. We were in the middle of a presentation to an important client, and my coworker, who was doing most of the talking, had a pen burst in his front shirt pocket. Now, this wasn't a huge leak, but it was a light-colored shirt and everyone noticed, so he excused himself to take care of it. Anyway, we carried on in his absence and he came back not more than 5 minutes later and sat down. I turned to look at him and the small blob of ink had since been replaced by a huge, washed-out stain covering about half of his chest. It was impossible not to notice, but we all did our best to keep it together and not laugh. That is, until someone says, "We can kinda see your nips in there, man." It was a government video conference call meeting. Coffee, tea, and snacks had been provided on a small table. A lady got up to get something and started screaming that the cup was filled with hundreds of baby spiders. A woman in tactical purchasing answered her phone, which was on full volume, mid-meeting with 2 vice presidents, 3 facility managers, and 3 department heads present. She didn't leave the room and proceeded to discuss her child's mental health issues and current prescriptions for like 15 minutes. No one had the heart to interrupt her, so we just sort of postponed the meeting until she finally hung up. Half the room had left by that point, extremely frickin' awkward. In a corporate training, and my assistant manager let out a huge as he fell backwards in his chair and crashed through a closet door. He had fallen asleep. Healthy-looking middle-aged lady died mid-meeting. Just slumped over, supposedly caused by a brain aneurysm. Really drives home the pointlessness of it all. Once I was walking down the hallway, tossing raisins into my mouth for a quick snack, and one bounced off my lip, across the floor and into an office where people were having a meeting. I knew they saw it bounce through the door because it was a big raisin and they stopped talking, but they couldn't see me yet as I hadn't walked by the doorway. My office was past their door, so I knew they'd see me eventually as I walked by to get to mine. So I had to make a choice. 1. Retrieve the raisin and admit my mistake, Or 2, pretend the raisin didn't come from me and walk past, potentially become known as Raisin Boy behind my back. I chose to retrieve the raisin and apologize, but it turns out they didn't even see it bounce in, so to them I just kind of wandered into the room, picked up a raisin off the ground, apologized, and left. I felt like I was in Seinfeld. In short, interrupted a meeting to retrieve my runaway raisin. I was in an interview for an internship after my junior year of college. It was kind of one of those interviews that was less, what are your credentials, and more, when can you start? Knowing this, I was feeling pretty confident and really not too nervous about it. This changed, though, when my interviewer began glancing around and shifting uncomfortably. He was a pretty big guy, so every slight readjustment in his chair was fairly noticeable. It seemed like there was something I'd said or done that had suddenly made him visibly distressed. As if everything was going well, but then I just offhandedly made a grossly inappropriate comment, like a race joke or something. Like I'd just said something that was wildly out of line and just blown right past it. I wondered what it was. I honestly couldn't think of anything. Maybe I was a little too friendly with him. Could that be perceived as being somewhat unprofessional? The interview went on for 5 more minutes as I sat there and thought about what I could have possibly done, and tried my best not to do it again. Rather abruptly, in the middle of my speaking, my interviewer stood up and promptly went number 2. He made brown in his suit. It was a stunning moment. It seemed like he might have suddenly realized that he was dealing with a very, very time-sensitive situation and was frantically trying to get somewhere. But it seems that the basic motor functions of standing up so quickly just forced it all out. It all happened very quick, to be honest. One moment I was explaining how my time as a summer camp counselor had taught me valuable leadership skills, and half a second later my interviewer was on his feet, standing in his own fecal matter. The drastic shift in tone left me completely speechless. Shocked and speechless, I literally didn't know how to respond to the situation. My mock interviews in college had seemingly skipped over this particular instance. All things considered, he handled it okay, I guess. He turned to his office mate and asked her to complete the interview. Oh, and did I mention that he shared an office with an elderly accounting lady, who was an eyewitness to the entire ordeal as well? So, long story short, she finished the interview and I got the job. You know what? Props to them for not being so image-obsessed that they denied a good candidate just for the sake of saving face. These things happen. I've never had a public code brown before, but I hope that when it inevitably happens to me, my onlookers will be as kind and understanding as possible. No shame on that guy. Where I used to work, we had a 9 a.m. PT Wednesday morning meeting. It was that early because half of the team was in California, half was scattered around the East Coast, and one person was in Belgium. So it was early for the West Coast so that it wouldn't be too late for the one guy in frickin' Belgium. The main company office was in California. This was a mid-sized startup with the usual startup culture, so most of the people got in around 10:30. Usually, the office was pretty empty for our meeting. I was one of the remote attendees. About 9:45, the CFO interrupts the meeting and awkwardly asks 4 of the 7 people to come with him. Weird. Then a minute later, he comes back to the remaining 3. He starts by apologizing and saying they were supposed to grab them when they came in, but they were the first ones in. He also apologized that he was about to tell them this as a group, but he wanted to lay it out. Those 3 had been laid off. Why do I know this? Because in the room they had a shared document pulled up on the screen instead of a teleconference. The CFO didn't know they were still broadcasting. Right after the CFO mentioned the layoffs, our Belgium attendee asked, "So, I'm guessing we should leave." I immediately signed off when he said that so that they wouldn't see that I'd waited that long. One of my employees was dialing in from home and hadn't muted his phone. You could hear his dog occasionally barking in the background. A couple of people chimed in, "Well, Rex clearly agrees with that decision," and he didn't get the hint. Then one of his kids started banging pots and pans together and he finally realized he should mute. We're a pretty relaxed bunch and it was an internal call, like no clients on the line, so it was an okay time for him to learn that lesson. I worked at a law firm that was doing a meeting of the senior attorneys and their associates. Some of the senior attorneys were traveling and had to conference in. Here's how that went. "Okay, it looks like we're missing Jim. Can someone get him on the phone? I think I remember his number. I'll call him on my cell." The sound of numbers dialing. "Hello, is this Jim? This is Roger calling about the meeting." "No, this is Dave. Who the hell is Jim?" "Oh, sorry, looks like I have the wrong number." "Yep, looks like it." The sound of hanging up. Maybe I misdialed. Let me try again." The sound of another number dialing. "Hey Jim, this is Hey, frick you, Roger. I already told you my name's Dave." Click. Our inconvenient meeting-killing statement was short, sweet, and to the point. It was as follows. A plane just crashed into the World Trade Center. When I worked at Taco Bell, we were having a quarterly staff meeting to talk about general issues and staff changes, as well as new items coming out, like an extra-large chalupa if I remember correctly. This meeting was happening at 7 a.m. to avoid having to deal with customers being in the lobby as well. A lot of people were annoyed, but I didn't mind because I was getting paid and I got to try the new chalupa. Anyways, halfway through, one of the manager's water broke. She, like all of us, was unaware that she was pregnant. We all just thought she was fat. So, needless to say, she missed her first shift that night and I ended up covering it. Still, a pretty good meeting because of the above-mentioned free chalupa. Glad that I didn't have to mop that morning. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. We had one day like that. There was a mass layoff for our tiny little company. A third of my department was let go. They were quietly telling each person individually throughout the morning. At about noon, they called everyone remaining into the large conference room to break the news of what just happened and let us know that everyone not in the room had been let go. Just before the meeting ended, one more person wandered past the door to the conference room, holding their lunch and whistling a happy tune. It turned out that one of the people being let go had already left for lunch when they got to their name on the list and hadn't actually been told yet. It was a whole herd of deer in the headlights there. Never been in a more awkward moment in my life. Again, according to the laws of comedy, I hope that this person saw everyone and laughed before jokingly saying something like, "Hey, what's the matter, guys? You all just get fired? What did I miss, huh?" Two come to mind. The first was an exiting CTO who was leaving under some scandals. I started in the company while he took a month of sick leave after it was discovered that he had bought equipment from our company to use for his personal business. He was apparently a pretty easygoing guy, but as his time started to dwindle, he became more impulsive and irrational. One day, my boss was going over some stuff with us techs about some new procedure. "So, you see, this chart shows how we intend to integrate our..." And the CTO ran into the meeting room Kramer style and drunkenly announced, Anyone who buys a domain in a foreign country needs to see me before they pay with us funds. Not a finger." Then he paused and ran out of the room. "So, this integration will reduce the time needed for cross-department approvals." My boss continued as if nothing had happened. Another one was a CTO having a huge meeting. The meeting room was packed to the walls with dozens more on speakerphone. Sometimes someone dials in, puts the meeting on their speakerphone and forgets to hit mute. And when someone's not paying attention, they don't hear someone screaming to put their call on mute. So you'd hear ka-thumpa thumpa on the keyboard and ring of their private message client at full volume. But you couldn't call anyone out because you didn't know who was doing this out of the dozens that called in. This meeting, it was real bad. The CTO started talking about possible downsizing. Some idiot was on the phone, ka-thumpa thumpa 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 thump of a keyboard, bring, ka-thumpa thumpa thumpa, bring bring. "Can the people on speakerphone hit their mute buttons?" screamed the CTO. Ka-thumpa thumpa bring. Then we heard a cell phone ring. "Hello? Yeah, hi Tom. Oh, nothing. What's up?" So we heard this guy talk to his friend about a new BMW he bought and how he Jewed the salesperson down for a deal. The CTO was Jewish and now real mad. He hung up on the call after telling anyone to listen to call back in. Later, he grilled departments to see who recently brought a new car. Quickly, the BMW owner was located in a distant office 20 miles away. He was banned from using a speakerphone and had to drive in for every meeting and report in person. I was once in a private meeting discussing whether to hire an applicant. Someone realized they left a sheet of paper at their desk, got up and opened the door to go get it. As soon as the door was open, an uninvited manager fell through the doorway. He had been right outside, pressing his ear against the door to listen in. In the middle of a meeting last year, the lady speaking passed out and hit the floor, microphone still in hand. We helped her up. After 10 minutes, she resumed speaking and blacked out again. We helped her up. She continues to finish the meeting while laying on the floor. What the frick meeting was so important that you had to do that? "If I die here, I just wanted you all to know. Congratulations to Jim, your employee of the month." Ugh. I was at a job interview and the interviewer had to go because Mike Pence randomly showed up in the building. I'm going to have to say it was the time that the general manager of my resort shot a rubber band across the room and it hit the wedding coordinator right between the eyes. It made for a very interesting staff meeting afterwards. I was alone in my office on a conference when over the intercom a polite female voice said, and I'll never forget these words, "Attention all staff. Armed intruders have gained access to the building." I remember thinking, this has got to be a drill, but it was at a weird time for a drill, shortly after 1 p.m. when many people were still at lunch. So I took it seriously and hung up the phone, locked my door, grabbed some scissors. Look, I know, but Christ, I had to have something. My friends really laughed at me for that, jerks. And I hid in the corner behind a big cabinet. It was eerily quiet for the next 10 to 15 minutes. I texted some friends who I knew were still out to lunch to not come back to the office. Eventually, another 10 to 15 minutes later, another announcement was made that there was no threat and the building was safe. It turned out that the security staff were updating the emergency announcements, and one of the guys, I joke you not, bumped the armed intruder announcement. Whoops. Well, thankfully it was a false alarm. It was not a small event. Some people were truly terrified. A couple of people collapsed and had to be taken to hospital. My favorite of the whole thing was that it was a lockdown strategy. Our building, it turns out, has automated steel doors that would slam shut and protect anyone in the wings until the cops cleared the building. Assuming, you're not trapped inside there with a fricking dude with an AK, so it wasn't an evacuation strategy. That said, there were numerous stories of our vice presidents running out of the building like goddamn George Costanza. So much for leadership. In follow-up meetings, the security team stressed that since there are only a few obvious points of exit from the building, they make for perfect kill zones, so, don't do what the bosses did. I was at a school board meeting once for work. The board is moving through the agenda in the typical boring way when some woman got up and started screaming about how she had no kids and should not have to pay school tax. One of the board members was trying to tell her that the high-rated public schools increased her home value. But nope, she just kept screaming at the top of her lungs until the super old security guard walked over and told her to leave or he'd have to call the local cops. The old libertarians causing problems again, I see. I hear about these weirdos in every public assembly, citizens meeting, and often see them in opinion pieces or letters to the editor. You morons benefit from these taxes, directly or indirectly, the same way as this woman does. Just pay your due and get a better hobby than screaming in public for attention. You're just bored. I was pretty new to the company and was at my 3rd or 4th department meeting. There was another manager there, a very attractive woman my age. Well, she sits down at this meeting in a rush. She was the very last to arrive. She was carrying a bottle of seltzer water with her to drink. She opens the seltzer and it explodes all over the entire conference table, soaking all of us. I laughed, she laughed, some others laughed, and some didn't. I'll never forget it. I asked her out about 2 months afterwards. Now our daughter is a junior in high school. In high school, I'd joined a Boy Scouts Explorers post at the local newspaper. A reporter had started up the group with the BSA and was teaching a bunch of high schoolers how to be reporters. We met at the paper weekly, and the paper gave us a page periodically that we were able to fill with whatever content we wanted, within obvious reason and generally accepted newspaper standards. I was at the weekly meeting, and the topic that week was press conferences, specifically how to ask what kinds of questions to get whatever information you need to get. So the reporter had dressed up as a baseball player and was giving a press conference for being the first woman to be signed to a Major League Baseball team. We were firing off questions and she was answering, and all was going pretty well. With zero warning, of course, a bearded guy busted into the room screaming at her about something she had done to annoy him. He grabbed her and took her out of the room. So all we could do was hear him yelling and screaming, and we were all frozen 15 and 16-year-olds wondering what the frick to do. Finally, they came back into the room laughing. It was all a setup to teach us about our observational skills. What did the guy look like? What was he wearing? What was he yelling about? Etc. That was a powerful lesson as a young reporter, because we learned that even when 20 people witness the same event, there'll be 20 different opinions about what just happened. So you have to ask a lot of people the same questions to start to pull together an accurate picture of what had gone down. This was back in the 80s, and no way in heck would such a thing fly now. Parents would lose their damn minds, but I will never forget that meeting. In a meeting with pastries, one coworker says, "Oh, donuts." Another one pipes in, "Don't take the cream-filled one, it's the boss's favorite." The coworker takes the cream-filled donut, takes a bite, and smiles directly at the boss. The boss walked over, reached across the boardroom table, grabs the donut, mushes it in the provocateur's face, sits down, and resumes the meeting. Ooh, it was me! I was the interruption. I had a crappy boss that loved meetings. In one of them, her and this other guy got into a discussion, and after about 15 minutes I said, "Can I leave? This has nothing to do with me and I have work to do." The other 20 people in the room thanked me privately and said they couldn't believe I didn't get fired. Not my meeting, and memorable, but not in a good way. I worked at a small company, just 3 people. I answered the phone one random afternoon, and the caller, someone I was familiar with, asked for my boss. I said the usual line about being in a meeting and can I take a message. He said, "Interrupt him now, please." The caller was not prone to drama, so I suspected it was important and got my boss. He was calling to tell us a photographer we'd worked with was killed, alongside another photographer while working in Libya. That was one of the most surreal days of my working life. Worked at a dog-friendly office and we had an all-staff meeting, so about 20 people and probably about 8 dogs. HR was in the middle of a presentation when a 30-pound dog, a corgi mix, so long and skinny with short legs, jumped up in an office desk chair sitting up by itself towards the front, and it starts spinning, and spinning, and spinning. It spun for over a minute and everyone was just losing it. The dog's face said, "F this." I've never laughed so hard in a meeting in my life. We had a board meeting at a church where they also hold various other meetings. My friend walked into AA with a 6-pack of beer thinking it was our board meeting. I was working for a popular restaurant in high school. There was a meeting at 8 a.m. on the first Saturday of the month. The only person absent was the head chef, a guy, and the line cook, a woman, both of whom had closed the night before. They walked in together halfway through the meeting looking like they just woke up. The line cook had a rubber stuck to her shoe. Everyone knew exactly what went on last night. What was your 1 in a million chance that you made and blew everyone's mind? I was taping some tracing wire to a natural gas line that we were installing. When I pulled the wire tight, it snapped against the pipe and it ended up hitting a wasp that was on the pipe, perfectly beheading it. Beheading? I ran out of gas while driving at full speed once and managed to coast over a mile and come to a stop right at a gas pump. I had a lot on my mind. I was going through a divorce, you see, and simply just didn't think about filling the gas tank. I didn't even notice I was out of gas until I felt the acceleration was no longer working. I turned down my music just in time to hear the engine sputter out. I quickly popped my car into neutral, turned on the hazard lights, and began coasting as long as I could. By the time I reached the gas station, I was doing about 4 miles per hour and had just enough momentum to make it up the embankment and to the pump. I didn't even brake until my gas cap was adjacent to the nozzle. Freshman year of high school, I was talking to a friend, walking in the hallway, chewing gum. The gum flew out of my mouth accidentally, and I panicked and kicked my foot hacky sack style and kicked the gum right back into my mouth. My friend said it was gross to keep chewing the foot gum, but I said it was an act of God. I was playing kickball in my neighborhood street with a bunch of friends and a few cute girls around. I was always pretty good, so people always backed up when I was kicking. I got pitched the ball, and when I kicked it, it soared up into the air, up the street, and straight into my friend's basketball hoop. It was a good 35 yards away. The sound it made was the best swish I've ever heard. To this day, I've never made that shot again. I was sitting in a bar one time next to a pool table. The guy knocked the cue ball off, knocked the beer out of my hand, but I caught the ball. Everything was fine. The guy bought me another round. I was playing beer pong with some friends at the shore. The ball got a dent in it, so I was thinking, I'm hot stuff. I'm going to try the old lighter trick to pop the dent out. Well, as it turns out, if you get the lighter too close, the ball just catches on fire rather quickly. So instead of dropping the ball or blowing it out, I tossed the ball and sank the final cup with a flaming ball of glory. It might not be a 1 in a million shot, but it sure felt like one. I imagine the awesome factor was somewhat lessened for whoever had to drink the awful cocktail of beer and toxic burnt plastic. But you know what? If you're already a few rounds in at that point, then that's the kind of thing you might do anyway. Play on, folks. I was shooting at 2-liter bottles in New Hampshire with a BB shooter without much success. I decided I'd gangster things up a bit and turned the weapon on its side and fired. I hit the bottle at just the right spot so that the BB bounced back and hit me in the forehead. Also, one time my cousin threw a boomerang and it came back and hit him in the forehead. We have big foreheads. 5 heads? My dad once decided it would be really interesting to try and throw 2 boomerangs at once. So he stacked them together and had at it, and it worked perfectly at first. During flight, the boomerangs had separated, one moving ahead and slightly above the second. I was well back out of the return zone. My brother, however, was right up next to our dad. So when they came back, he was in the line of fire, and being rather young, he hadn't really mastered catching a boomerang and decided getting out of the way was the best option. He ducked under the first, only to have the second one catch him squarely in the face when he stood up. I remember a lot of screaming, but no permanent damage was done. The next day, not having learned our lesson, I caught my granddad in the back with a poorly thrown boomerang. Those things are dangerous, mate. I was playing baseball when I was around 10. I think I was playing first base and wasn't paying attention, and all of a sudden, a ball landed in my glove without me realizing. The pitcher threw it and the batter hit a straight line drive to me. I'll never be able to do that again, even if I try. I was miles away from home. I crossed the road behind a bus when a car came down the other side of the road and nearly knocked me over. I was okay, the car was braking. I hadn't looked where I was walking and just popped out behind the bus, so I expected the owner of the car to yell at me. I looked up and lo and behold, it was my dad driving home from the shop. It must have been 1,000,000 to 1 odds that it was him, as I live in quite a large city. Also, I learned my lesson about crossing behind buses, and he gave me a lift home. I flipped a coin in my garage and it got stuck in the rafters. I walked away, disappointed. 5 days later, I was walking to my car and it fell down into the shoe I was wearing. I had my phone connected to its charging cord once and I was holding it and accidentally dropped it. The cord caught on the side of my end table, making the phone do an Indiana Jones-style vine swing on the cord. When it reached the apex of its swing, it detached from the cord, spun in the air, and landed upright in the seat of my chair facing me. I actually thought it was sentient for a second. Oh, I'm very glad my story will never happen again. I was walking into the pool room of a pub to join my friends sitting in the corner. As I opened the door, time slowed down. I noticed an exquisite detail just how the person taking their shot mucked it up, sending the ball flying. I saw the perfect parabola of the cue ball in the air tracing the curve of its majestic flight, right into my family jewels. Ouch. I was waitressing, and one evening when carrying out food, I tripped and fell. One plate just dropped all over the floor, smashing into 1,000,000 pieces of food and china. The other plate slid across the floor and came to a stop right next to the foot of the customer who'd ordered that meal. In middle school, my friends and I were joking around. I forget exactly what about, but for some reason I'd said something about hiding a body in a locker, and I turned to the nearest locker, the kind with a combination lock built in. I playfully tried to open it up as part of the joke. I randomly twisted the lock and pulled the handle, and the damn thing just opened. And inside was a black garbage bag with something big inside. I was completely floored by my dumb luck. They thought I'd planned it. Also, the first thing we found when we opened the bag was clothes, which freaked us out, but then it was just a bunch of notebooks and stuff. Phew. I was acting in a play and whipped my head to the right to react to what another character was saying. This was something I did every night in rehearsals, but for some reason, on opening night, my glasses shot right off my face. They just went flying. I have no idea, but I immediately caught them with my already outstretched hand. The audience ate that up. They applauded like this was a tricky maneuver I'd practiced every night. But it was literally something I could never do again. 2 minutes later, I whipped my head to the left to react to another character, and the glasses went airborne again, smacking the actress in the face and falling behind a prop so that they couldn't be easily recovered. The first time I ever played 2048 and won, I thought that was incredibly easy and didn't play again for a while. Since then, it's become increasingly popular and I realized that what I'd done was actually quite a feat. I've since played countless times and I'm convinced that given 1,000,000 tries, I'll never win again. Well, the narrator read this comment, decided to go and try this game mid-recording, set his entire schedule back by half an hour and got less than 1/16 of the required score to win. That game seems very hard to me, so well done you! I believe I was 13 years old at the time. I was fishing off the dock of my parents' beach house. I went to cast and released the fishing line into the air. A seagull was flying by at the exact time and the hook got attached to the bird. I caught a mother-frickin' seagull with my fishing rod. I tried to reel the seagull in to remove the hook from its mouth, but the bird was having none of that. It was kind of flying like a kite until I decided to cut the fishing line. Years ago, I was ice skating when I saw a group of my school friends. They were obviously there for the first time and kind of shuffle sliding out to the center of the rink in a group of 4 without taking their feet off the ice. I was still new at this too and not very good, but I skated over to say hello. As I came up in front of them, I realized I was going too fast and tried to slow down, and I overbalanced. I fell forward with my hand out. The heel of my hand landed on the ice, and I did a perfect circle about 8 foot wide around it with my skates opposed to each other before I managed to remove my hand and stand upright again. Frickin' show off, one of my friends grumbled. I was walking into the men's room while chewing gum and realized I didn't want the gum anymore. I spat the gum out and kicked it mid-air into a tiny bin about 10 meters away. Made me feel like Zlatan. I once squashed a fly mid-air with a sausage tong. The 5 or so family members that were there didn't even believe me when I showed them the fly remains on the tip of the tongs. This is my single greatest achievement in life. When I was just a young lad, I was eating a meatball when my friend said something funny. A chunk of meatball about the size of a small marble was thrust from my nose like a cannon. My friend's dog caught the meaty marble mid-air and ate it. I peaked too early, you guys. When I was in high school, I was talking to a friend in the gym after school while chewing gum. She turned her head while I was talking, and just as she did, I accidentally spit my gum directly at her temple. I snapped my hand out in front of me, caught the gum, put it back in my mouth, just as she turned back. Didn't notice at all. I silently applauded my sudden onset spidey reflexes and went on with the conversation as if nothing had happened. I kicked a volleyball into a trash can about 100 feet away. There were witnesses. Casually dropped 2 coins on a table when the one coin started spinning on top of the other, slowing down to a halt, still standing sideways. I've tried to do it again, but it's absolutely impossible. My ex-girlfriend and I were leaving the local coffee shop. I drove away without knowing she left her phone on the roof. Made the turn onto a busy main street, and through the crack of her open window, the phone flew in and landed in her lap. What a frickin' shock. She lost it maybe 2 weeks later. I still don't know what wonder of physics made that happen. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. 4 a.m. I was hungry, so I went to Dunkin' Donuts. I grabbed whatever money I have in the car, turns out to be $4.63. So I go make my usual order completely oblivious to the fact that I have no money. The register shows my total, $4.63 frickin' cents. I just emptied my hand to the dude at the counter, he knows what just happened and gave me a nod of approval. I drove away with my donuts and wraps like a mother frickin' boss. I was playing football or soccer in a park with about 6 or 7 friends when a family walked by and the eldest daughter, who must have been at least 20, shouted that, "If that fricking ball comes near me, I will pop it." I considered this to be completely rude and uncalled for, as we were just playing a nice game in the middle of a park. As the family walked away, I could see her walking like she was some frickin' awesome B-word for throwing out a needless threat to a bunch of kids. So I thought to myself, I'm gonna teach this lady. So I took the ball in my hands and kicked it towards her, assuming, because I'm not at all athletic or skilled, that it would go nowhere near her. But by some divine intervention, it conked her straight on the head from 50 yards. The rest of the family laughed really hard at her, so she was too embarrassed to steal the ball and pop it, and her dad threw it back to us. I was carrying 2 punnets of raspberries to the counter in the supermarket when the top one slid off and fell. It rotated 360 degrees and I dropped to my knees and caught it on top of the remaining punnet. Well, I can tell the author here is under a certain age because my knees were already cracking in sympathy. I don't care if I'm dropping a priceless porcelain vase, there is no way in hell I'm dropping knees first into a hard floor voluntarily. I got a house under contract to buy at $42,000. On the drive back to my office, I stopped to let a farmer know that one of his cows was out of the fence by the highway. He thanked me and saw my shirt that said, "I buy houses," and he asked me if I had any for sale. I said, yes. It was the one I'd just gotten under contract. I sold it to him for $60K. I made $15,000 in about 3 hours of work. 2 things for me. First, I was driving on the highway after a very bad winter storm, lots of ice. My car started doing the wiggle. Next thing I know, I'm spinning. I screamed out of reflex and saw the guy driving in the car next to me with his shocked face. I landed perfectly straight and kept going. I'll never forget that guy's face, and I'll never forget the pair of pants that I lost that day. And the second? Well, I was playing World Series Baseball on the Sega Genesis, so like 1994-95, my cousin was kicking my butt. He had the bases loaded and was down by 1.0 outs. Hits a line dive and I made my short stop dive for it, but instead of diving forward, he did his dive where his body was facing the wrong direction, so he sort of dove backwards towards the ball, then proceeded to get a triple play. I ended up winning. We watched the replay of my triple play for like 30 minutes. It was so unbelievable. Finally, my brother. We went to a house party and just got hammered. We were playing quarters, the game where you bounce quarters off a table into a shot glass. I don't even remember the rules. I just remember doing that. Looking around the table, there was a guy with a paper bag on his head and another guy with a lampshade on. Everyone was just smashed. My brother says, "If I land this, you all have to chug hard liquor. If I lose, I'll do it," and proceeds to fill glasses with hard liquor. He puts down 2 shot glasses and everyone is thinking there's no way he'll land 2. He then tilts his head back and puts the quarters over his eyes, slams his head forward and lands both quarters in both shot glasses. The table erupts. Chairs are thrown backwards and broken, eruption of screaming. I ended up blacking out thanks to the large amounts of Beefeater I drank that night. Good times. Back when I was new to Street Fighter, my friend invited me to a tournament. The thing is, I didn't know how to play. I won by mashing buttons. $200. I could never do that again even if I tried knowing the game better. I guessed an activation code for a Flight Simulator 98 game that I stole. No joke. One of the first times I played Zombies Call of Duty Online, I made it to level 40. I tried and tried many times later and never made it past 30. Oh, there was this one time. Back when I was just this little white fishy guy fresh out of my dad, I penetrated this huge frickin' thing and got born. This one time, I saw the DVD logo hit the corner of the screen. My mouth fired saliva like a water gun once, no idea why. I thought I was a Pokemon. I was in a musical a few years ago and one of the characters had to drop some coins. All goes well for the first few nights, then one night he drops them and one rolls down the stairs and halfway down the theatre to the audience, whereupon it stops at the feet of a 3-year-old girl who at this point realizes she is the chosen one and has magic powers, and screams loudly and excitedly for an impressive amount of time during the rest of the play. Yay! At my ex-girlfriend's new loft apartment, it was 2 stories with the main living area, kitchen and stuff downstairs and the bedroom upstairs with a half wall, I used to throw things off her upstairs wall at her cat. Socks, primarily. One day I had a nickel in my pocket and I noticed an open, half-full Snapple bottle on the other side of the room downstairs, so like 15 feet away and 10 feet below me. I asked if she bet me I couldn't make it in. She humored me and said, "Sure, what's the bet?" I said, "If I miss, I'll never throw anything downstairs again." And if I made it, she had to give me a down-under kiss and swallow, which she hated, right then and there on the couch. She also hated doing anything on the couch. My girlfriend accepted. I fully expected to miss, but I lined up, did a couple of fake pumps and threw it. 2 seconds later, you heard the perfect clink and kusploosh. I ran around the apartment celebrating like I got the winning goal in OT in Game 7 of the Stanley Cup, and my girlfriend even paid up. In short, I threw a nickel into an open Snapple bottle 15 feet away and 10 feet below me. I got some action. I'm Australian. It was just a normal summer day and I'd finished eating an icy pole and still had the stick in my hand. I walked into the games room to play the PlayStation when I saw there was a huge white-tailed spider sitting on the wall. I said, "Screw this," and casually tossed the stick towards it. Somehow it hit like a spear right between the abdomen and main body and sliced it clean in half. The spider didn't even move. Its abdomen and the stick fell to the floor and it was left dead sitting on the wall. I 360 no-scoped a bottle into a rubbish bin at school once. My life can only go downhill from there. Is there any other way than no-scoping when it comes to throwing a bottle? The person who asked this last question makes a valid point, but still, the act of successfully hitting anything with an aimed projectile after a 360 turn in mid-air is impressive. Maybe not 1,000,000 to 1 impressive like some of these others, but hey, if that's the high point of your life, well done you. I played hockey when I was younger and I was terrible. I was 4th line forward, who maybe scored 1 garbage goal per season. I was skating out of my zone and I shot the puck from center ice to go on a line change, and I ended up sniping it top right side. I didn't even see the puck go in because immediately after I shot it, I was skating to the bench to complete the change. I asked junior Senator Barack Obama at the time he was campaigning for presidency to take my phone that already had my mother on the other line and wish her a happy birthday. He talked to her for about 3 minutes while his security guards mouthed "F you" and basically resembled exaggerated cartoon bullies. They apparently didn't like the idea of this and made it more than clear. I'd once lost a DS game. After hours of searching, I still couldn't find it. My room then could be described as a pigsty, so I had no idea where it could be. In a fit of rage, I kicked a pile of clothes as high as I possibly could. Most of them fell on my own head, and when I shook my head to get them off, the DS game fell out of the pile and onto my DS, which was sitting on my bed. Okay, hold on to your socks, people. I think I've got the craziest one. I correctly inserted a flash drive into a USB port on the first try. I was in a hotel parking lot, about to leave Vermont and head home from my friend's wedding. I was with a couple of friends, hopping into my car when I noticed my empty juice bottle from the ride up was on the floor of the car. I see a trash can all the way at the beginning of the parking lot, back by the hotel, maybe 50 to 60 feet away. A couple of things. First, this trash can had a top on it, and two, this bottle was completely empty plastic, with very little weight to it. Basically, I was going to have to hurl it as hard as I could to even get close. I have no idea if I can even throw it far enough. So I said something along the lines of, "Check out this, motherfuckers," and chucked the bottle in a majestic parabola shape towards the trash can. It must have hit an updraft or something because it made it all the way. It hit the outer rim, spun a full time around the rim, and then dropped into the hole beautifully. Best throw of my life. Did I mention there were about 4 other 5 carloads of people in the parking lot at that very moment? I proceeded to sprint around the parking lot, arms out like an airplane, high-fiving everyone in the parking lot who was getting in their cars. I swatted a bee with my hand and somehow removed its head. I am the king of the north. As a side note, the body kept moving for like another 15 minutes. That twitch made me nervous. I live next to a golf course, so when golf balls fly into our yard, I hit them back. One day I had 2 balls fly in, so I took my 7-iron and instead of flying over back to the golf course, I smacked it right into a telephone pole and the ball came flying back at me. I had to swat it away with my left hand. I kinda chuckled and hit the second ball and the same exact thing happened. Whew. What's a dumb local rumor you heard as a kid that turned out to be true? The US Midwest. Rumor has it that up the old road out of town, somewhere in the woods, was a satanic cult that held seances and other mystical rituals by firelight. It scared the willies out of us kids, and our parents wouldn't let us ride our bikes anywhere on that road. Decades later, I was working on a commissioned history project for the town and talked to the old man who owned the oldest homestead in the country, way back in the woods along that road. While photographing the creek that ran through the stone foundation basement of the home, which the settlers used for water generations ago, I noted the burnt-out tea candles everywhere. Guy lit up and said, yeah, back in his younger days, he and his wife used to host elaborate costume parties at the property, often by candlelight for the fun of it. He had heard rumors of the satanic cult and thought it was hilarious, so he and his friends ran with it and held parties in monks' robes and had bonfires and lived it up. He still laughs about it, and now so can I. This older kid had this lightning streak scar all over one side of his neck and down his body. The rumor was he was throwing stuff at the power lines behind our neighborhood. Turns out he was. He was throwing copper wire at them and it arced. He's lucky to be alive. A vagrant-looking man used to collect cans from local parks and whatnot. Imagine someone pushing a shopping cart in tattered clothing. Rumor was that he was generationally wealthy, and when he passed away he left a fortune to the Parks and Rec department to update facilities. We used to have a local homeless lady, supposedly a Vietnam Army nurse. Her experiences there ruined her and she refused help from her wealthy family. It was all rumors though until she passed. Her family turned out to be the people who owned Utz potato chips. They paid for her funeral since now she wasn't around to refuse any money or help anyone. This is a little more light-hearted, but when I was in elementary school, probably like 3rd grade, all the kids in my class would joke about how our primary teacher and our Spanish teacher liked each other. We were all little kids, so of course it was just a dumb little kids joking around thing. That is until a few years later when I was in middle school and I found out my old teacher and Spanish teacher recently got married. Thank you for posting the story of a cute little after-school romance blossoming into a marriage. And there was another one to immediately follow that story. Yeah, this happened to me twice. I think my radar for teacher romances was excellent. My grade 5 teacher was a very awkward man. Kind, but weird. We had a substitute teacher every once in a while who was recently divorced. A stunning lady with her 3-piece outfits, sculpted cheekbones, and big eyes. I swore in grade 6 that they were dating, but I couldn't prove it, and no one would believe me. That is until my oldest was in grade 1 and I was in the class to ask the teacher a question. I realized immediately that this was Mrs. Y, my substitute from 20 years earlier, and that she'd in fact been dating and then married my grade 5 teacher. Then there was the high school one. My advanced math teacher was an awkward woman, kind of geeky but weird. We also had a substitute teacher who was geeky but tall and handsome with gorgeous blonde hair. For a reason you'll see soon, we'll call him Mr. X. I was in an all-girls high school, so girls being girls, we all fawned over him. By grade 11, I swore that their casual chit-chat in the hallway was making date plans after school, but I still couldn't prove it either. Part of my stand-up bit for a grade 12 Frosh week was introducing teachers to the new students, and I welcomed those teachers as Mr. and future Mrs. X. A few years later, they were married. Both couples are still happily together. The first couple are now enjoying retirement. In 2008 or so, a guy we knew was shot at the park by adult substance dealers. The news and reports stated that he was a kingpin in the green herb trade and had made tens of thousands before getting popped. His parents denied, of course, until investigation found out that he started selling to pay his parents' mortgage, and he had in fact been selling large quantities of green herb. The park we used to play football at used to be a cemetery. They'd exhumed all the coffins and moved them years before I was born. We'd freak each other out, especially at night, saying there were still bodies buried there. One day we were playing and they were doing some groundskeeping work and they found a coffin. The state came out and found 30 more. We were actually playing on top of hallowed ground. I'd heard about 2 different teachers at my high school being creepy, and they've both since been fired for inappropriate contact with students. There was a rumor at my high school that the building down the way was a cult. It wasn't unheard of to dare people to go over there, and then you'd end up being followed or sometimes invited to dinner. Turns out it was the HQ of the cult the Duggars were in, the Institute in Basic Life Principles. I was watching that documentary and my mind was blown, because all of the high school rumors had been true. There was a taco truck in town that sold green herb if you asked for a side of lettuce. I hope everyone who asked was actually hoping for the devil's lettuce instead of iceberg, because it was true. There was this jerk in my junior high gym class, a real bully type, and when he'd act out, everyone would ridicule him for his mother being a smack-using working girl, and we'd laugh and laugh and laugh and laugh and laugh. Well, it turned out it was true. There was public confirmation in the paper, and his bullying made a lot more sense because it turned out his home life was what you'd expect from someone having a mother like that, and no one talked about it anymore, and we didn't laugh so much. Ironically, I think he felt so ashamed when everyone found out, he actually stopped being such a jerk. When I was a child, we had the legend of the Baroness. Supposedly, she lived in a haunted house and drove around a pink hearse. When I was old enough to drive and explore on my own, I finally saw her, in her pink hearse. She also lived in a house that would have coded as spooky or haunted to a small child. It was just an old house with neat architecture. That there was a secret cult in one of the neighborhoods. Turned out to be true. It was NXIVM, a cult. That if you rode bikes or four-wheelers down a certain trail, an old man would come after you and attack you. A few years later, some people were riding four-wheelers down the trail and an old guy shot and killed them both. Damnedest thing, they'd already left his property before he caught up to them, and he killed them on public land. I'm pretty sure he died in prison a few years ago. There was a kid in my middle school class who was a real jerk to everyone, struggled through simple classwork, and was good at sports but fought so much they'd hardly let him play. One day he pushed it too far and the whole class decided to mock him for the jersey he wore to school every day, and how he only wore undershirts and the same 2 pairs of pants. No gym clothes either, and a ratty pair of shoes. Turns out his parents were alcoholic crap piles and he lived with his very old grandmother and basically raised himself. Couldn't afford clothes and barely got enough from her social security to feed the both of them. Found out when me and a couple of friends found him sobbing in the bushes after school because he didn't want to go home and worry his gran. Some guys ended up buying him some clothes and helped him get some cleats to play soccer. My mum let me buy him lunches on my account too, since the free school lunch was basically a piece of bread with a half slice of cheese and a wilted apple. The guy is a financial manager now and doing pretty well. Rumor about a local businessman who tried to end it all and was rescued. Some weeks later, he ran into a burning building and rescued 2 young children, sustaining severe burns in the process. A few months ago, I saw him in the pub on the green. All the skin on his face and hands had melted, and he had skin grafts everywhere. Happiest man in the pub. What a hero! That our neighbor was an unspeakable act offender of the worst sort. Married with kids, too. Sadly, it turned out to be true. One day he dropped dead of a heart attack, and when the family started going through his stuff, they were so disgusted apparently they just sold the house as is, with the furniture and everything. Always heard rumors that this kid who I rode BMX with, his dad was a high-ranking member of the Hells. One day we were over, years later, talking crap around the fire in his backyard, and about 70 patched members arrived at the house for a meeting. They brought us a crap load of beer and told us to find a park to drink it in for the next few hours while they had their meeting. Not gonna lie, if someone's dad did that for our group of friends, we'd think they were the coolest kid in school afterwards. Also, it's a little funny that these guys got you out of their hair by getting you to go do illegal underage drinking somewhere else. They probably could have just told you to leave and you'd be so scared that you'd do it. I have 2, both about elderly men. First, there was an elderly man that could be seen walking all over town. long grey beard, usually seen in tattered clothes. Walking Man or the Silver Bullet were nicknames for him. The rumor was that he was actually really wealthy, but lots of people just assumed he was homeless because he was always walking, carrying groceries or whatever. Well, about a year before he passed away, it came out that he was actually one of the wealthiest residents in our town when he donated millions to local youth programs and schools. Turns out he just liked walking a lot and placed no value on material things like clothes and cars. Second, there was an elderly man who was actually homeless. The rumor was that he drank himself crazy some years back and just never got help. He was in and out of jail a bunch but always seemed to be given some slack by law enforcement. The truth is tragic. He did indeed drink himself crazy, but out of necessity. He was a paramedic. One night he responded to a wreck that turned out to be his wife and daughter. They'd been hit by a distracted driver speeding on a narrow road. Neither survived. Understandably, he was never okay after that. He'd sometimes check the pizza shop I used to manage for spare slices. Broke my heart that all I could really do was offer him some free pizza. I hope you rest in peace now, Red. A kid in my 3rd grade class was always late to school. I'm talking he showed up to school 5 minutes before classes were released to go home once. The rumor amongst parents and teachers was that his mum was an alcoholic and the dad lived a couple of towns over. So he often had to wait for his dad to take him or care for his mum until she was well enough to drive. This was a private school with no bus, by the way. She died of liver failure a few months ago, according to Facebook. It makes it so much more messed up that everyone knew, including a teacher, and didn't have any sympathy for him. I distinctly remember the teacher telling him on multiple occasions that it was his responsibility to show up on time. He was 8. Was he supposed to drive himself? It makes me so sad. I hope he's doing okay now. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. That a quiet and polite guy we knew growing up was a murderous and ruthless gang leader. We used to go to his parties. We saw him out on the town and always exchanged pleasantries. We would see him at the bar and there was little indication that he wasn't to be messed with until one day we bumped into him in a parking lot. Again, just exchanging pleasantries. How are you? What's going on this weekend? Stuff like that. A truck pulled up a couple of spots over from us. This guy goes, "Hold on just a sec," and calmly walked over to talk to the guy. A short conversation ensued and he opened the door and started just pummeling the guy. Like on top of him in the driver's seat, punching down. We were stunned. After a short while, he got out of the truck and walked back to calmly finish his conversation with us like nothing had happened. We saw the truck pull away, so the guy lived. A few years afterwards, more rumors surfaced about him, and it made sense that they were true, until one day his arrest made international headline news. He received a heavy sentence for a ton of different crimes, likely won't ever be free, and his affiliates are still doing business. There was a summer camp in East Tennessee that my scout troop used to go to that was out of council, so we had to be invited. And there was this hike that was part of the first year's class, a class that was pretty much how not to die at summer camp. It took you to this beautiful overlook that gave you gorgeous views of the valley and the part of the Appalachians we were in. The thing is, this overlook was outside of camp property, or so we were told, so they had to get permission every time they took the kids out of there, and the area was strictly off limits to everyone. Of course, rumors and legends were everywhere in this camp, and being the mid-2000s, one of them was that if you went to the overlook at night, the lights in the valley below spelled gay. Keep in mind, gay was a funny word back then, and everything among middle and high school boys was called gay. Now, we'd heard this legend for years, and one year, due to the shenanigans my troop got up to, we were told we wouldn't be invited back the following year. So, a couple of my friends got together on the last night of camp and said, "You know what? If we don't go tonight, we'll never be able to confirm or deny the legend, so let's sneak out and put this thing to rest." So, we snuck out after lights out, took the 2 or 3 mile hike to get out to the overlook, and I swear, right hand to God, the lights below actually spelled out in messy but clearly legible letters, capital G, capital A, capital Y. We all just kind of stood there for a few minutes in stunned silence because absolutely none of us expected it to be even partially true, and I'm sure no one believed us when we told them and thought we were perpetuating a lie, but I swear it actually said that. Everyone at my school knew someone else who told them that this one house just down the road from the school was owned by a locally known substance dealer, and it was his emergency hideout house. Years later, I was driving past and laughed at how ridiculous the story was. And 2 weeks after that, the house was on the news with armed police surrounding it. Turns out it really was this substance hideout, and the guy was involved in way more stuff than just that. They found substances, weapons, and evidence of a human trafficking ring right in there. The house got mysteriously burned down while this court case was going on and has been a burned-out, empty lot ever since. The two women in their late 40s were actually homosexual. Everyone on our street believed them when they told everyone they were sisters. I used to run errands for them maybe 3 times a week, and they always gave me a shilling every time. Well, given that shillings were phased out in the UK at least in the 1970s, it probably makes sense that they'd pretend to be roommates or sisters or whatever for the time. It's a damn shame they had to hide who they were, but it's not the first time the narrator has heard of a story like this. The kids would tell stories, and one that reaccrued was about the young woman that killed her parents with scissors. In a town of 300 in an isolated area, nothing ever happened, so even as a kid it was easy to dismiss. My senior year, my class found out that our teacher told us all the details. He was the only person in the county with a color camera, so he was drafted as the official crime scene photographer. It was during a cold snap, so at the same time state police arrived, the scene was frozen. The temperature was so low that our teacher's camera froze up and he had to fake it, then return later with the sheriff to retake the pictures. The girl had a home life that I can only describe as horrific for a number of reasons. So one night she did them in their sleep, with a pair of scissors. She dragged the bodies to the garage and attempted to burn them, but the only thing she had that was combustible was some perfume. She then came up with a story and ran to the neighbors. Turns out she was sent to the state mental hospital. It was a local urban legend that this huge, old, abandoned house was haunted because like a century ago there was a murder there. Kids would freak each other out over it, tell ghost stories, sneak into the property, whatever. I thought it was just that, an urban legend about an abandoned house. Nope. In the early 1900s, the husband and wife were found dead in the house. It was never solved, but the son was suspected because he was missing and never found. No one moved into it after that, and it's sat empty ever since. I only found out because they planned to tear it down to build apartments on the property 2 years ago, but the local community rallied to preserve it. That tight biking turn at the bottom of the hill everyone called Dead Man's Curve because someone died there? Someone did indeed die there. The rumor that our local China buffet was using illegal immigrants as waitstaff and then trafficking them across town to a massage parlor that they owned. It was true. Huge scandal when it happened, but it was hushed up pretty quickly. The restaurant reopened some months after under new management. A kid at my school whose mum disappeared when he was a baby was rumored that she was killed by Ted Bundy. Decades later, researchers think it's actually true. When I was a little kid, like 7, and roaming around the neighborhood with my gang of little rascals, this was in the 50s when kids could safely play outside all day with their pals without parental worry, there was a rumor that in the house 2 doors over from mine that the parents had locked their mentally handicapped kid in the attic and that he was one of my gang friends' older brothers. We played with him, but he always denied that he had any siblings. We were never allowed to enter his house, which was strange because we were always stopping at our other friends' homes during our days to drink water or use the bathroom. About 2 years later, the boy and his family moved away never to be seen again. But when they moved, it was discovered that yes, an older brother did exist, and he was kept locked away in the attic. It was a very creepy discovery. Mental health awareness and acceptance was in the dark ages in the 1950s. I grew up where there were some signs of Native Americans. I started believing that this one particularly beautiful spot had to be sacred and probably was a burial ground. I'd convinced my friends to hold hands in a circle and try to commune with the dead. After I got a bit older, I was super embarrassed that I'd ever done such things. A few years later, a Native American came by and told us how sacred the land was that we owned, and asked permission to hold peyote rituals with his tribe and others on our land. To this day, they still come out and set up a teepee and drum all night, especially flying on hallucinogenics. Turns out I was right. There was a teacher at my school that kids would claim was insanely rich, like that he lived in a giant mansion near the oceanfront and he only taught because he just genuinely loved being a teacher. He was pretty private, so he'd always say, "You shouldn't ask people about their finances," when kids would just ask him. So senior year, he has the seniors over for a year-ends award ceremony and superlatives type dinner deal. Yep. Super rich and lived in a huge mansion by the ocean. Said he inherited all his money from his parents, and I think he said he had a sibling or 2 that got written out of the will for being crappy, so he didn't have to share it. Became a teacher out of college, and then when his parents died, he inherited everything. He just kept teaching because he liked it. We had a rumor about there being a white horse in the woods behind the movie theater in our town. There were a couple of homeless people living there though, so no one went and checked them out. Well, before seeing a movie one day, me and a couple of friends decided to make the trek. We stumbled past a makeshift camp, found a small path that led to a fence. We stood there for a couple of seconds and then seemingly out of nowhere, a majestic white steed came trotting towards us. We snapped a quick pic on an early 2000s cell phone of our friend and the horse and got the heck out of there. The picture absolutely looked fake and no one believes us about it to this day. I am personally mortified that you found American Shadowfax and didn't immediately go on a quest to tame the Lord of all Horses. Although for all we know, one of those guys you assumed was a homeless person was actually a wizard. The differences between Gandalf the Grey and a homeless man are fewer than you think. It would also explain why he was there and why nobody ventured into the woods. There was an unmarked graveyard in the field across the road in rural Canada. The oldest guy in the area talked about there being one somewhere in the area, but he wasn't sure where. Maybe 10 years ago, an older gentleman, maybe in his 70s, came over to our house when I was home from college and asked who owned the property across the road. He said his family lived in the area over 100 years ago and he was looking for the family burial plot. He asked for permission to search and spent time with dowsing rods in the field, maybe 75 acres total, but he was focused closer to the road. He marked over 15 spots that he said were places where bodies were buried underground, and that he could tell by the way the rods moved if it was male, female, or a child. He even showed us how the rods would be still, but when he walked over the spots he marked, they would cross or move away from each other. He came back the next year and spent some money getting a big stone and a nice custom plaque made to mark this spot. He probably spent $1,000 or more on that, including renting a backhoe and operator. Then we never saw him again. We used to play hide-and-go-seek at night, but we'd never go to that area where he placed the markings because it felt eerie and sometimes it would be foggier. After he showed us the dowsing rods thing that one day, I told my younger cousin to lay on the ground so I could try it on him. I walked over him with the dowsing rods and nothing happened, so I said, "Well, guess you haven't got a soul," and walked back to the house. What seemingly harmless parenting habit is actually messing up your kids? Never saying sorry to them. My mum only just recently started telling me sorry when she gets worked up about something. It's built up such a resentment for her over the years, and I also have trouble saying sorry myself because of it. Tell your kids sorry, especially if you overreact to something they did. Not following through with your promises. If you told your child you were buying ice cream tomorrow in the hopes that they'd forget, and the next day when they ask you, you tell them no, they'll see you as unreliable. I taught my children at a very young age that outside of extreme circumstances, failing to keep a promise made is the same as telling a lie. Therefore, I won't make promises to them that I'm not absolutely certain I can keep. They learned early in life that I take my promises very seriously and I'll go to great lengths to honor them. We've hit very hard times recently, and I've had to delay delivery on some promises, which breaks my heart. But they know that I'll fulfill those promises eventually, and they're much more empathetic and understanding than their peers have been in similar situations. I found that when my parents teased me about stuff that I was clearly uncomfortable with, it made me tell them less later in life. I have a good relationship with my parents, but I don't tell them lots about my life because it's easier if they don't know or tease about it. Same for me. It was usually mild stuff like, "Ooh, he has a crush on a girl," or something like that. But I hated the attention and it made me uncomfortable. Later in my 20s, when I met my wife, she couldn't understand why I was so secretive. I'm pretty sure it's from that. I just stopped telling people things and still don't tell my parents everything that's going on in my life. I love them, of course, and we have a great relationship, but yeah, I'm pretty sure the teasing messed me up a bit. Once my brother was sent to his room by my dad after they got into an argument about something stupid, I used Google to prove my brother right, and we were both grounded for being disrespectful. Until he found out we were actually right, he never ungrounded us until the week was over and only told me he was wrong. Moral of the story, being right is apparently disrespectful. A seemingly harmless mistake is rewarding your child with something when they do something they already enjoy. Take, for example, reading. If a child just enjoys reading, let the child read without getting any reward. Once you start rewarding the child for that act, their intrinsic motivation gets replaced. It's called the over-justification effect. I agree with this, but I also understand that it presents a conundrum if you have multiple kids, some of whom need to be motivated more than others. Seeing others be rewarded for something that you already do better definitely stings a little when you're young and can make you lose motivation. I was a kid who loved to read, and I still do, and whenever we participated in a program that rewarded reading hours, like the library summer program where you got raffle tickets and could win stuff like baseball and museum tickets, I felt like the most glorious scammer. Joke's on you, Pizza Hut. I would have done all that reading anyway, suckers. In a different vein of thought, making finances a taboo subject. Financial illiteracy can be a devastating thing once entering adulthood. You want to keep your children from making your own money mistakes? Don't be too proud to teach them what those mistakes were. And to clarify, I don't mean robbing your children of their innocence by putting the weight of your debt on them at an early age, but rather teaching them how to properly budget their money as they earn it, how to build savings, what credit is and how to responsibly manage it, credit utilization, the danger of revolving balances, not using credit as an emergency fund, for example. You teach them about predatory interest rates and the true cost of a loan, set realistic expectations for the costs of living, stuff like that. Don't smother your kids. My mum quit having her own life the moment my brother and I were born. She was incredibly devoted and a loving mother and was very kind to us, but when we were born she stopped having friends, didn't work and was home every single night from when I was born to when I moved out in my early 20s. She was very easy to upset because she had no other source of self-esteem, and any time I screwed up, and I screwed up a lot, it was as if I had levied a very personal attack against her. In the last 5 years or so before I left, I don't think we had a single conversation that didn't drive her to tears, and I promise I wasn't that bad. I constantly felt cornered and stressed and fell into a depression as a defense mechanism, and she took my resulting lack of performance very personally, creating a very treacherous cycle that was only broken when I enlisted and finally got away. To this day, I often feel like I'm a bad person who failed to live up to her love. Not congratulating your child when they achieve something. A friend of mine never got any praise from his parents growing up. Always felt he wasn't good enough. Show the child that their hard work doesn't go unnoticed. Not creating a safe space for your kids to tell their secrets and make mistakes. When I was younger, I excitedly confided in my mum about my first boyfriend, but instead of calmly talking me through this, she immediately brought my dad into the conversation, they both yelled at me, and forced me to break up with him. If you qualify for food stamps, take the frickin' food stamps. Don't make your kid live on macaroni and cheese made with water because we don't take handouts. Pride can be such a dangerous thing. The health, safety, and well-being of your children should trump anyone's pride, in my opinion. Using them as props for jokes in public. Glad you got a kick out of it, Dad. Not stopping when your child says stop, whether it's teasing, tickling, or wrestling. Kids who have parents that don't respect their boundaries always seem to end up being the biggest jerks and bullies because they've learned they don't have to respect other people's feelings. Mocking them, laughing at them. Adults do it to each other all the time, but kids who haven't been immersed in the background cruelty of our culture for years just don't understand that it's the language of the land, and not that they themselves are particularly unworthy of respect. There was one time I was trying to help a friend at their birthday party by taking their presents to them, but all the adults and my parents thought I was being selfish and wanted them for myself, and joked and laughed at me and just ignored me explaining myself and carried on. I think that hurt my self-esteem a lot in the long run. Well, realistically, it'd be helicopter parents. You always want to look out for your kids, right? Make sure they're not doing things they're supposed to do, walk in without knocking. It ruins a relationship with a kid because even though you have a sense of privacy, the kid doesn't and will always be paranoid of anyone entering their room without warning. It ruins them. Would my mom let me do this? Is she okay with that? Is what they're always thinking. My parents were helicopter parents. I wasn't allowed to lock my bedroom door. My mom listened in on my phone calls, this was in the landline phone days, and went through my personal belongings when I wasn't home, including reading the notes that friends and I passed in school. I wasn't allowed to date. Doing this only prevents your children from learning how to form healthy relationships. You should teach your children how to do things, such as date, in a safe and responsible manner rather than ban it. Not giving them factual and straightforward health and life skills education talks. My parents answered my questions truthfully and at an age-appropriate level throughout my childhood, and I'm extremely thankful for it. Others around me have clearly not been that lucky. My parents relied on a school to teach me about the birds and the bees and have never said a word about it. Luckily, I had excellent life skills teachers who taught me everything. I'm not gonna lie, I kept anxiously waiting for the moment when they were gonna finally have the talk with me, but it just never happened. Getting them involved in problems they have no control over. My parents felt the need to keep me in the loop regarding our pending foreclosure and argued in front of me over which one was to blame when I was 10. What possible reason is there to share that with a kid? I barely slept for months. I was convinced the cops were going to bust in at midnight and throw us all outside. On the flip side of this, let your kids know if the family's facing an eviction. I was the only one home when the marshals came. The saddest part of this question is that my mum had done so many things that everyone is saying is bad, like not hugging, not praising, telling me to suck everything up. So let me give you one that I feel like would have helped me a lot growing up. Don't be afraid to admit when you're wrong or when you make mistakes to your child. My parents would go out of their way to justify any mistake they made and make it seem as if they were right no matter what the situation was. It gave me a pretty messed up view of right and wrong, as well as learning from mistakes, but was fixed by my grandma. That's a long story. This one seems to be a recurring answer for this particular topic. It's pretty common to think of your parents as these infallible beings for the longest time, isn't it? And purportedly not super healthy if they keep trying to force that impression after the fact. Admit your mistakes, parents. It sets a good example. Giving in to your kids' wants and desires without upholding discipline and consequences will give your kids a large uphill battle to climb later. I say this because my parents babied me a lot when I was young. I never had to do anything I didn't want to. For example, when I started getting bad grades because I wasn't doing my homework, my parents would have conferences with my teachers so they could give me extra credit. I had a rude awakening in college when I realized how hard life is. I 100% love and adore my parents, and who's to say if they did discipline me more then I'd have turned out different? Probably not, but you never know. But I know that when I have kids, I already know a few things I'll do differently. Pretty much telling you that whatever activity that you enjoy doing is annoying or dumb. I used to love singing. I was in chorus and would play my favorite songs over and over to learn the words. Not only did my sisters tease me for it, but my parents told me to shut the hell up constantly. So I stopped singing. I must have been terrible, right? I sing when I'm alone or jokingly with some friends. What really broke me was when I went to visit everyone for the holidays. My sister said that she was surprised I never pursued singing, since I seemed to love it so much when I was younger. I nearly started crying and had to bite my tongue so I wouldn't scream at her for being one of the reasons I stopped. It's always funny for the ones doing the teasing, but it actually hurts the ones being teased, especially when it's coming from people who are supposed to love you. When I was 4, my parents adopted a kitten. Of course, I'd never seen anything quite so delightful before, and I could barely keep my hands off the little furball. So, about 2 or 3 days passed, I got up in the morning and walked out and asked, "Where's the kitten?" And my parents told me that he'd died, implying that my roughhousing had killed it. I was terrified to touch an animal for several years afterwards. In fact, they'd simply given the kitten back to the people they got it from. I grew up in a very strict Asian household. My parents were very strict on the never wake us up policy. To this day, I get very anxious and refuse to wake people up, in fear of being yelled at and locked in a closet. I'm 22 years old. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Telling your kid they're always a winner. We love our kids and want them to feel special, but it's setting them up to be disappointed later in life when they find out not everyone can win. Let them feel the disappointments early on and teach them it's okay. They'll grow up better to handle the stresses of life. Telling them that the family members who are mean to them or neglect them actually love them. Treating crying as if it's something that only weak people do. My dad in particular used to yell at me for crying, which only made me cry more, which made him yell more and, well, you get the point. In high school, I tried to bring up the possibility of me having anxiety problems that I'd spoken to the counselor about because my friends made me go since they were worried. Dad told me I was just being a drama queen. I can't express that I'm anxious or stressed around my dad because apparently other people have it worse. Even now, I'm 21 and seeing a psychiatrist in a couple of weeks because I've just felt so bad lately and I would never let my dad know. I think I'd rather die than my dad know I've been seeing a psychiatrist and discussing the possibility of me having OCD with said psychiatrist, which does explain a lot and is actually kind of comforting for me to know, because Dad's got so mad at me for being weak lately. Being overprotective as a parent, or just not listening to your children. Oh, I have a few doozies. Thinking that whenever your kids open their mouth, they're going to lie to you. Telling your kids that they're just being dramatic whenever they're actually upset about something, and telling them they're being manipulative whenever they show their feelings, like tears. Making them give physical affection when they don't want to. If Uncle Bob makes them uncomfortable, don't make them give him a hug. If Aunt Karen freaks them out, don't make them give her a kiss. Of course, it's important they be kind, but don't teach them that the feelings of others are more important than their own bodily autonomy. If someone close to your family dies, don't say to your children, they're just sleeping. Congratulations, you just created a lifetime insomniac. My 5-year-old understands death. We don't sugarcoat it much, and death isn't taboo. When a kid understands death as a permanent condition, it makes it easier to explain the gravity of dangerous situations. Sticking through a toxic fricking relationship for the kids. It doesn't help. Part ways, be good parents, spend quality time together with the kids, but don't stay together and frickin' hate your lives under the guise of it being for the kids. We pick up on that stuff. It's a terrible example to set. Not having them do chores. My parents pushed me to be an academic, so doted on me hand and foot as a kid to make more room for study. When you're too young and stupid to know any better, you think it's a blessing. When I moved out to uni, I didn't really know how to clean, when to clean, what to clean with, how to wash clothes, how to get them to dry, stuff like that. The only thing I could do is cook and binge drink. That's no way to bring up a kid, and it's a steep learning curve doing all that stuff for the first time in your early 20s. It sounds like a super lame answer, but make sure every kid does their fair share of chores. My parents unconsciously taught me to value external validation over everything else, and it has been the cause of persistent depression in my adult life. Examples that seem innocent, like praising good grades and emphasizing academic achievement, being inordinately pleased when people said good things about me to them, encouraging me to apply for awards and scholarships and then being super proud and boastful to others about how amazing I am, tacking up newspaper articles about me, certificates and other things all over the house, writing Christmas letters that were essentially a laundry list of all my accomplishments, telling me that I could do anything I wanted or be anything I wanted, that I was exceptional. I think you get the idea, right? All of this taught me that I was only worth what I could do. It's taught me that I'm only as valuable as others deem me to be. Outwardly, I appear poised, accomplished, and successful. Inwardly, I have an exceedingly low, virtually non-existent sense of self-worth. I push myself constantly to do more and achieve more and earn more accolades. I burn out and have panic attacks. I feel numb inside. I don't know who I am or what I actually enjoy because I've been groomed to only do what others want of me. I'm almost 40 and basically completely lost. Discouraging them from asking questions. Yes, it can be annoying to keep hearing, "But why, Daddy, Mummy?" But I've met far too many adults who admit they stopped asking questions because as a kid, their parents would shut them up or be like, "There she goes asking questions again." Inquisitive minds need to be fostered. I've heard of parents instituting a 5 whys in a row limit. I have no idea if that's good parenting or not, but it does seem like at least acknowledging that a healthy amount of questioning is okay without letting it get ridiculous. That said, telling kids they aren't allowed more info after a certain amount may have its own problems. Saying, "Because I said so." Telling them they're smart. I'm not saying to not praise them for a job well done, but reinforcing that a child is smart will teach them that they don't need to try as hard to learn. Education should be a constant challenge, in the same way exercise should always be a challenge. If it's not difficult, you're not learning. Saying, "I don't care who started it." I grew up with friends whose siblings would target the one with the bad temper, provoke them into a rage, then cry and play victim when they got hit. In this case, it does matter who started it. A parent has to make it clear that violence isn't okay, but neither is provoking someone into said violence. It doesn't matter that said person never hit or kicked while their sibling did. They would never have gotten hurt in the first place if they didn't encourage the aggression to begin with. Children are clever and they'll find loopholes in their parents' rules. Parents need to be better and snuff out that kind of BS when it starts. If they don't, they'll raise a manipulator and a scapegoat. One will use them and one will resent them. It's a lose-lose, all because of a simple rule. Telling them not to cry or telling them to suck it up. That one messed me up for a while. Creating an environment where you tell your kid their feelings aren't valid just because they aren't the same as yours, or your kid processes their emotions differently than you. Angrily telling your kid that they're too sensitive or dramatic or theatrical or hormonal is just going to mess your kid up and encourage them to bottle up emotions to avoid upsetting you, and it's going to lead to major communication issues. Also, constantly pushing an intelligent or self-motivated child to work harder and harder and to do better. You're setting your kid up to be a perfectionist, which can be incredibly damaging to his or her mental health in the long run. Always assuming the oldest child is to blame for everything. Telling kids they have to finish their plate. Sometimes there's too much food for them. I was overeating for years and it took a lot of work to break the habit and shed the extra weight. Telling your daughter that if a boy is mean to you, it's because he likes you. Choosing their friends for them. Let them figure out who's bad and who's good on their own. Within reason, of course. The words, "Oh, look who finally decided to join us," when referring to you coming out of your room when guests are over. That's a way to ease your child into social anxiety. Never showing up for events. I remember my parents didn't come to most of my chorus concerts. It really sucked to see my classmates' families cheer them on while my parents were absent. I brought home one of my chorus program papers to show my parents, and I found it in the trash the next day. I was sad because I wanted to keep it, but seeing it in the trash, I didn't want it anymore. I love my parents and I don't blame them for not showing up. They were small business owners and it was hard for them to find people who could work for them whenever I had concerts or anything. It still hurt though. I thought I should add that my little sister and grandma would come to them, but my relationship with my grandma isn't great. It's just not the same as having your parents there, if that makes sense. Anytime a child is playing with a child of the opposite gender and they respond with, "Ooh, who's your boyfriend or girlfriend?" that crap completely stopped me from even speaking to girls until damn near high school. I just saw this happen in front of my eyes not too long ago. My aunt started teasing my 12-year-old cousin because she found out that a girl he was friends with had a little crush on him. Well, that friendship ended right there and then. My cousin was obviously really embarrassed. Of course, my aunt made the big announcement in front of a bunch of people. I was really mad at my aunt. Like, what the frick did she expect? Having kids before you've worked on your own psychological issues. These issues will always be part of the relationship between you and your child. You can't hide it. Become the person you want to be before having children. Yes. And if you don't have that option, work through your issues as you need to. Don't shut them out or act like everything's fine. They know when their parents are upset, but don't rely on them to be mini therapists for you. For example, just saying things like, "Mummy's feeling a bit sad today, but she's working hard to make today better." Just let them be a part of it without overburdening them with your issues. Not letting them have freedoms, such as going out with friends, making their own friends, things like that. I'm 17 and now I'm just getting actual friends outside of school for the first time. I was never allowed to do anything as a kid. I know my parents cared about me, but it's hurt me more in the long run. It's caused some serious social anxiety. I feel this. My mum was very restrictive because she didn't want me to make the same mistakes she did growing up, like substance use, staying out late, and skipping school. But she never explained to me about responsibility, safety, or things like that. It was just, because I said so, because it's my house. It backfired on her as I became rebellious and wound up with a severe substance use problem that I'm only just now managing, and dropping out of high school 3 months before I would have graduated. Hovering over your child. I don't just mean helicopter parenting, which is even more serious. I just mean doing things like demeaning their chores, trying to steer them down a certain career path, putting them in programs or sports they don't like, stuff like that. Constant remarks about the child's body, like telling them they need to lose or gain weight or making any comment about their body type. It goes for everyone in the family. Don't do that, unless you want your child to develop an eating disorder later on in life. Yelling at them. My mother yelled at me constantly growing up, and I ended up learning some really insidious, subtle life lessons and struggling with anxiety because of it. What was the most cursed thing that went down in a locker or bathroom? I was coming back from a road trip and we were driving for 3 hours non-stop. At this point, I really needed to pee, but we couldn't find a place to stop at. After another hour, I was very desperate and felt like my bladder was going to explode, so luckily we found a gas station with a bathroom. I was running to the bathroom, the only one there was, when I saw 2 little girls giggling and running away from there. Long story short, there was number 2 all over the walls, sink, floor, everywhere. I mean, I couldn't hold it anymore, so I just closed my eyes, did my best squat, went to my car, and tried to pretend that had never happened. My mum once got caught in the clean cycle of a self-cleaning public restroom. For those who've never heard of such things, it's a completely sealed unit. You pay to get in, do your business, and when you exit, the door locks, and the whole stall is just automatically cleaning with this high-pressure water system. Some random girl once saved my butt as I was trying to sneak in after her without paying. Basically, she had paid, was done, and coming out of the stall, she stopped me as I held the door trying to enter and said, "I wouldn't do that if I were you, the whole thing is flushing." I closed the door and you can hear the stall being pressure hosed down from the outside. Damn, I owe that girl some karma. I ran a venue that sometimes held raves back in the late 90s. My girlfriend came to one with her best friend and I let them in for free. At some point in the night, someone came up and told me people were doing the deed in the men's room. My assistant manager and I went in. He thought he was hilarious and kicked open the stall and yelled, "You cannot do that in here." There was my girlfriend's best friend trying to give a down-under kiss to a guy who couldn't get it up because of the substances they were taking or whatever. She was clearly also on something and was kneeling in an inch of disgusting water because the toilet had backed up and overflowed. I was taking a dump in a one-person bathroom outside a gas station, and as I was pulling my pants up, a mum and her daughter walked in. They had to have seen my eggplant. They screamed and closed the door. I washed my hands and nervously walked out and they were gone. They just left the scene. And yeah, I've been wondering why I didn't lock the door, and I've just remembered right now. I didn't know you had to get the key from the register, so while the door was open a little, I walked in and just did my thing. I guess Mum grabbed the key from the cashier like you're supposed to, and unlocked the locked door. And when I say they had to have seen my Johnson, it was because I was in the perfect angle for them to see everything. Not that they had to see it because it was a sight to see. Quite the opposite. The narrator is ultra paranoid about locking the door at all times. However, life seems to compensate for this by making him the person who walks in on life's less paranoid people in situations like the one we just mentioned. I honestly don't know which one's worse, because it's not like the shame and sourceless guilt of seeing people at their least ideal moment isn't excruciating either. I was at a track meet last week and just ate a huge lunch after a race, so I needed to take a massive dump. I waddled into a stall and plopped myself down on the toilet seat. I then proceeded to push out the most gut-wrenching log of my life. As I finished wiping and got up, I realized that a line had built up outside the stalls. I flushed the toilet and it doesn't go down. The water level doesn't go down either. I then proceed to go on a walk of shame out of the stall as about 10 other dudes saw my impressive mound slowly rise out of the toilet bowl and overflow onto the ground, seeping its way to the low corner of the bathroom. Next time you should establish dominance by staring directly into the eyes of every man waiting in line. I did this. I am the danger. And they'll respect you more. I walked into a locker room to see an undressed fellow standing in the shower area, there was no water running by the way, covered head to toe in soap suds so thick that it might have been shaving cream. The only thing not covered was his eyes. It was surprisingly creepy. At the gym, they have community towels for wiping the seats of the machines. Just grab a towel and do your thing. At the end of your workout, throw it in the towel bin. I sweat. I mean wet t-shirt contest looking type sweat. So not only do I wipe the machines thoroughly when I'm done, I also have to keep wiping the sweat from my brow. When I'd finished my workout, I went to the locker room to change. Setting my towel, my phone, and my earbuds on the bench, I opened my locker, took out my bag, and began to change. There were other guys in there in close proximity, so I just kept my eyes forward and went about my business. Still sweating, after putting on my clean shirt, I grabbed my sweat towel off the bench and wiped my face. Then I started putting my gym stuff into my bag, looked at the bench, and saw my phone and earbuds. They were still sitting on my sweat towel, the towel I'd used during my workout. Slowly, I looked down at my hand, at the other towel I'd just wiped my face with. It wasn't my one, and it was so wet. About 10 years ago, me and some friends were driving back from the lake. I had to go number 2 real bad, so I asked the driver to pull over at the next exit. All I had on was flip-flops and swimming trunks. My one buddy, being a monster, ran past me to take the stall, and I was left to wait for him in this old-style restroom. Next, this old man busted through the door, pants around his ankles, shuffling his feet, holding his member. He was projectile blasting streams of diarrhea all over behind him. He shuffled past me, pushing on the stall door, which my buddy had locked. I was pressed up against the wall, scared to death of the horror that I was witnessing. The old man looked around, spotted one of those long urinals that go all the way to the floor, and made a spin for it. He turned his body to head to the urinal and spray-painted an enormous load of diarrhea across my legs and feet. I screamed out in terror like I'd just been fatally wounded. The old man bent over the urinal, pumping loads against the back of it as it splattered everywhere. He just looked at me with these dead eyes and said, "God damn diarrhea." I will never forget that day for however long that I live. I once had a parent-teacher conference in the Buck. I was the teacher. I'd been at the gym and finally decided I could just change and not duck into one of those tiny rooms. Standing in my undies when I heard, "Mrs. Melser? Oh, you teach my son." Yep, sure do. My principal allowed me to count that bathroom consultation towards my conference hours, so there is that silver lining. I was on the way home from my friend's house and things just started to get worse. I needed to crap so badly that I immediately went to the nearest public restroom. Upon arriving, only one cubicle was available because the other 2 are out of service. I also find it strange that there are no urinals inside this bathroom. But anyway, after doing my business, I just realized that the flush wasn't working and there was an empty pail beside me. I was about to get water on the drum at the corner of the bathroom when 3 or 4 girls went inside the bathroom. I was still inside the cubicle and I know that they're going to use this loo, so since only one cubicle is available, they're just waiting for me to finish. When I got out, they started screaming and asking what I'm doing inside the girls' bathroom. One of them saw my pile of number 2 and told her friends about it. Then they looked at me with disgust and left the bathroom immediately. I'm a guy, by the way, if that wasn't obvious. Some years ago, La Havana Social Club had an album of traditional Cuban songs popular across Europe, and I decided to visit Cuba. While traveling across the island, I heard that they'd be playing live in Havana the following weekend and decided to hang around to see them, only for Fidel Castro to decide to address the country on that very same Saturday night, effectively cancelling everything. We turned up at the venue, but everything was shut up and there was no one about. 2 weeks later, I was in a lovely town called Trinidad and find out to my delight that they'll be performing there in Trinidad that very night. And not only that, they're practicing right at the moment in a charming garden bar very nearby. We head straight there, and it was all I could have hoped for. Beautiful walled garden, small bar with some services, a single toilet, and a group of skilled elderly Cubans doing what they do best. There were very few other people there. The music was so familiar, it was an amazing thing to see, so close, so personal. And then during the third or fourth song, it happened. You may have experienced this before. You know, when you have to go, like right now. Great. The toilet is there, right next to where they're playing. A very rustic toilet with a door, like many things in Cuba, that doesn't quite fit right. And I was loud. I was really loud. The music stopped. I left straight after that, avoiding any eye contact. Honestly, I think stopping a concert with the sheer concussive sound of your bowel movements is as much of an achievement as anything else. Even if they didn't want to thank you, I think you deserve recognition for the strength of your mega dump. Well done there, sir, or madam. I'd gone to eat with my wife at an Indian restaurant, and then we met up with co-workers at a bar afterwards. The colonic bullet train that often follows Indian food just hit me. I didn't want to crap in the bar bathroom, so I ran down to the gas station on the corner. I know, it's still gross, but in my experience, anything is better than the bathroom at a bar. But then it turned out the gas station's bathroom was closed. I had no time left and ran back to the bar and into the bathroom. I now realize that 1, the bathroom door didn't lock, and 2, the oddest arrangement for a restroom I'd ever seen was before me. As soon as you open the door, there was no toilet with no stall, followed by the sink, then 2 urinals. I was mortified, but at this point, it's happening. As I sat there, blowing out Indian food, a steady stream of patrons wandered in and out. Every time the door opened, I could see the entire bar. When they washed their hands, we were intimately close, and it was nearly impossible not to make eye contact as I struggled to end this nightmare of face-contorting colon cramps. Eventually, my buddy Brian swung the door open, sees me, and does an about-face while cackling hysterically. I don't know if you've ever tried to wipe your butt while in close contact with strangers, but let me tell ya, it's humiliating. I finally think I'm done with this nightmare and wandered out to my table of co-workers who were all laughing hysterically and clapping. One of my bosses nods to the DJ that announces, "The shameless pooper has now concluded his evil reign over the men's room." And he spins up "Doin' That Butt" by EU. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I went number 2 at the cricket, and there was surprisingly no toilet paper. It was before the start of the first women's game of the season, so unsurprisingly, I was alone in the toilet. I had no issues. I had to then wait until the next person came in. After sitting there for about a minute, contemplating whether or not I could use my old cardigan and dump it, a 12-year-old girl came in who passed me under a very decent amount of toilet paper. I said thank you to the girl, but also sung her praises to her mum waiting outside. I was so relieved. In elementary school, we never used the last stall because it was haunted. A junkie shadow boxing in the mirror after he tried to flush his pants down the toilet. I feel very sorry for the poor schmuck that had to clean that up. When I was in middle school, our female gym teacher was relatively masculine and was rumored to be batting for the other team. She was also not a very nice person, probably because she had no choice but to be tough. Anyway, being a middle school and mid-2000s, LGBT issues and people were still considered extremely taboo. A cruel rumor started that she had a camera in the locker room to record all of the girls changing. I thought it was super mean and chose not to perpetuate it. I didn't believe it until I saw it after basketball practice one night. There was a tiny webcam on top of one of the far lockers, pointed out across the whole locker room. It had a blinking red light. My blood ran cold. At this point, I should have checked it out or gone to another teacher, but I was 12 and instead decided to ramp up the rumor more and tell all of my friends what I'd seen. The next time I was in the locker room, the webcam was gone. The gym teacher also confronted me about spreading hurtful rumors and asked from where I'd heard it. She effectively managed to shut it down before it reached school administration and nothing ever came of it. It always bothered me because if she was guilty, I tipped her off by spreading gossip, and if she was innocent, I was a huge jerk that perpetuated a homophobic rumor. At this point, I don't know which narrative is accurate. The whole thing just makes me feel bad. Actually, here's one. I was in line at a festival to go to the Portaloo, and there was someone holding up the toilet for a good 15 minutes. Everyone in the line started getting annoyed and ranty until one chick ran up and ripped the door open. There were 2 girls wearing overalls pulled down around their middle, with their fronts hanging out, and they started to yell at everyone while rubbing their noses. They yelled something about having to take a dump, changing sanitary pads, and having a chunder, but me thinks it might have had more to do with the white snow up their butts and noses. I had to go to a meeting across the state. It was a long drive and I'd had a lot of coffee. So I went into the restroom about 30 minutes into the meeting when I thought no one would be in there to have what we in the caffeine addiction business call a rear-end disaster. So I went into the stall and just started going ham. In the words of Danny DeVito, so anyway, I started blasting. You all know what that's about. After the London Blitz was over, I was fumbling around for toilet paper in a half squat, looking less human and more ape than normal, just messing with the TP dispenser because all of the paper was jammed up inside it at a weird angle. I got out and started doing damage control on my butthole when this lady just frickin' burst into my stall. The lock was kind of screwy but absolutely engaged, and I had a purse on the floor as a backup signal to passers-by, but this dolt just frickin' slammed into my stall. She saw my whole situation. I didn't even feel like a human. I felt like a toilet paper monster. There was crap on my butt cheeks, and this lady stumbles in like a gazelle, happening upon two lions making gross, disgusting lion love. But does she leave, like a sensible person? Does she say, "Oops, my bad for ripping that lock apart and ignoring the several other unoccupied and obviously open stalls and going directly for the closed-looking one with the noises emanating from it like the gosh damn bombs over London"? No. She looks me dead in the eye and says, "Why didn't you lock the door?" and just waits for an explanation. Like, lady, no. Go away. Now I was the gazelle and she was the frickin' lion. I just took the hand not covered in crappy TP and started slamming the door until she got the hint. I also clogged that toilet, but I plunged it, so no hard feelings. The worst part of all this? I'm technically her boss. Maybe she was desperate too. Maybe she was trying to avoid a similar blitz in her pants and that's why she charged into your stall door like it was the wall and she was the Kool-Aid man. Awkward in any case. I don't understand what had happened to make your butt such a disaster zone, but you do have my sympathy. This is my near-miss story. I had some hot wings, the kind that you need to sign a waiver for, with my cousin just before a dinner with my girlfriend and various members of my family at my brother's father-in-law's house in the rich part of Vancouver. We both managed to finish the wings, but my cousin couldn't hold them down, and 10 minutes later, everything was back up. Not to brag, but I was victorious. Fast forward a couple of hours, I can't eat at dinner and my stomach is feeling awful. I go back to the very fancy bathroom and just chuck up. Nuclear hot sauce is not the nicest thing going in, but coming back out at body temperature and mixed with stomach acid makes it particularly vile and creates a feedback loop that makes me want to throw up more. Eventually, it finishes, I clean up and head back out to the rest of the family. After another hour or so, my girlfriend, uncle, and I go for a walk. About 10 minutes in, I instantly, and I quite literally mean instantly, have to go to the toilet. My gut decides to do a backflip and I had to stop on the spot to close my sphincter. My girlfriend and uncle found this weird and I had to explain the situation. I sent my girlfriend on a scouting mission to find the nearest toilet. Fortunately, half a block away, there's a bar, so in between waves of oncoming craps, I shuffle towards the bar. I get to the toilet and there's just one cubicle currently occupied. I was desperate. I know that soon I won't be able to hold it in, so I have a great idea. I'll go to the women's. I leave the men's and opposite is the women's. It's locked, turns out it's my girlfriend in there. I go back to the men's, I wait 10 seconds. It's coming, there's no way I'm going to be able to hold it much longer. I look at the urinal. It's my only option, otherwise I'm going right here in my pants. I rush to unbuckle my belt and then by some kind of miracle from the gods, I hear a flush. I get a rush of adrenaline that gives me the power to close my butt in time to rush past the man exiting the cubicle. He says something to me, but at this point I couldn't care less and just apologize. I sit down and release. It was glorious. Purely magical. I can't tell you how happy I was to not crap myself. There was loads of splashback, but I could deal with that. It was over in seconds. I look at the toilet roll holder and to my dismay, there was nothing. Turns out the guy had told me that there was no toilet paper. However, it seemed like the gods weren't quite done with me yet. I hear the door open to the toilet and I can see shoes coming towards the cubicle. It was the guy who'd just finished with a roll of toilet paper in his hand. He passed it under the door and told me he thought I needed it. The Canadians are just so damn friendly. I don't know if school restrooms technically count as public restrooms, but nevertheless. The year was 2001. I was in year 2 at school, and my younger brother had just started kindergarten. Whenever the bells would chime to signify the end of recess, there'd always be a bathroom rush, while everyone relieved themselves before heading to class. One particular recess, I'm standing shoulder to shoulder with a bunch of other kids, taking a leak into the urinal. Without warning, I feel a solid shove between my shoulder blades, and try as I might to delay the inevitable, I topple into the little gutter area of the trough. Many of the kids tried to avert their streams, but it was too late. I was soaked from falling in and then some from above. And as I looked back up, shielding my eyes from the burning rain, who should I see but my younger brother looking down at me? I might have been covered in unspeakable fluid, but I assure you, he was the one with the crap-eating grin. For whatever reason, he just thought it would be funny to shove me in the urinal. The joke was on him though, because my teachers quickly decided that I'd had enough for one day and called our mum to go pick me up. My brother didn't understand why I got to go home early and he didn't. I can still picture the look on his face as I waved at him through the window as the car drove away and the teachers were scolding him. First night staying at my girlfriend's house and I got bad diarrhea. After spending 20 minutes filling the bowl with liquid chocolate, I went to flush and to my horror the toilet blocks. For some reason, the bathroom had no plunger, toilet brush, or anything I could use to remedy the situation. After panicking a few minutes, I noticed the smell was getting bad in the bathroom, and to save embarrassment in front of my girlfriend's family who I'd just met, I had to clear up the toilet ASAP. I made a split-second decision to shove my arm down the loo and clean the pipe by hand. I didn't quite register what I'd done until I was scraping my toilet paper and crap from out of the pipes. God must have smiled upon me because the next flush worked perfectly. Although the toilet was clear, my conscience was not. I've got to live with that forever. In the store where I work, there are 5 stalls. One is handicap accessible and 2 leak at the back so that when you sit down, you just have this constant drip on your lower back. The other 2 were in use, so, knowing that no handicapped people work there, I used the handicapped one. Of course, this is the day that a really higher-up supervisor in a wheelchair that normally works in the office 4 miles away had a meeting and needed to use the bathroom after said meeting. I'd only seen this guy once a couple of years earlier when I started this job. I leave, head sunken apologetically, and he just gives me this knowing look. Not mean or upset, just knowing. It still keeps me up some nights. Not horror, but weird. In military basic training, there are no doors on stalls. Pretty shocking for 100 new guys who lived at home the day before. We all had to go at the same time and stood in line waiting for the next guy to get off the pot. Well, turns out about 2 out of the 100 guys on my team wipe from back to front. They actually stand up after taking a dump and then wipe their butts from back to front by reaching between their legs. Those 2 caught so much crap in the form of laughter and ridicule from the 98% that wipe the normal way. They soon changed their ways. By now, I know some of you guys are out there wiping from back to front. It's 2% of you from my experience. You're doing it wrong, in case no one ever told you before now. Went out to eat at a place about 20 minutes from our house. On the way home, things started to not feel so good. I was gonna crap myself, and I was still 10 minutes from my place. There's some new home construction, and I see a porta potty at one of the home sites, so I flew around the corner, screeched to a halt and jumped in. That's when my frickin' zipper in my pants sticks, and I unleash so much bad calamari diarrhea that it's literally flowing out from the bottom of my pants. I text my wife, who was in the car, that I didn't make it, and she drives the 20-minute round trip to our house to get me some clothes, while I stand in a 100-degree crap house, surrounded by a mess of my own making. Ladies and gentlemen of the night, what was your first day of work like? I started working because I'd gotten a few propositions through a dating website. I was studying med at the time and I was short on money. So one time this guy made me what seemed like a lucrative offer and I agreed. I didn't know how any of it worked, so I told a friend I was going out and to call or text me in an hour's time. We initially met in a park at night, sat in his very, very nice car and had a bit of a flirty chat, then made an appointment. He said he was 58 years old, but I think he was about 15 to 20 years older than that. A week or 2 later, I drove over to his apartment. I was petrified, but I needed the money, so I rang the doorbell. It was a lovely apartment, and he paid up front. He was nice enough. He asked me to do some things that I didn't want to do, so I said, maybe not this time. Kept an eye on the time via the helpful clock radio next to the bed, and thankfully he finished on time. Had a shower, bit of a chat afterwards, and then he kissed me goodbye on the cheek. I think the fact that I said no to one particular act annoyed him a little bit, but he texted later and asked if I'd like to do it again, and with another working girl in the mix. Things proceeded from there. Not sure if this is what you're looking for. I was a different kind of worker, a pro-dom. I'd been selling used undies for the money and thought I'd take it a step further. I decided to find a small private dungeon to rent by the hour and put up an ad online. Being new on the market, I got plenty of inquiries. Other than the first session, I loved the job for so many surprising reasons. I learned so much about how people work and often about myself. But my first pro session was terrible. He was a good client, however anything that could have gone wrong, went wrong, including cracking his rib during a trample session, which is very rare when everything's done correctly. However, I've never had an issue after that first one and ended up with quite a few wonderful regular clients. For many clients, they'd lived their whole lives keeping their tastes a secret. When first-timers came up to me, I was sometimes the only person they'd ever talked to about this part of their life that they often despised. I was honored to be the person who helped some of these people come to terms with their desires, and often felt more like a counselor than someone working in my particular profession. Never before had I realized how much stigmas can change and ruin a person's life. I'm so much more aware now of the comments I make because you never know what friend or loved one is secretly getting hurt by your words. The narrator can tell that this is going to be one of those videos where he learns a lot about a section of society that he'd normally never even think about or get the chance to talk to. This last story alone was very enlightening, so thanks for writing in. I drank a heap of wine before I went to the agency. This was about 2.5 years ago when the industry was booming. I did booking after booking and went home with a massive wad of cash. I didn't think about it too much, I just loved the rush of being booked and making so much money. The industry is dead over here now and I really have no idea why. I was an independent worker of the night for 4 years. My first night, I was ridiculously nervous. I went to an upscale hotel, nervously walked through the lobby, hoping I looked like I belonged there and not like what I was really there for. I was nervous the whole elevator ride up to his room. I walked to his room, lightly knocked on the door. He opened the door. For the story's sake, we'll use the name Sarah, and said, "Hi, Sarah?" And like an idiot, I replied with my real name. We laughed it off. It was quick, 10 minutes. He was polite and clean, in the area for business. I ended up seeing him a few more times over the years. It was always very nice. He tipped on top of the hourly rate, which was always appreciated and made me choose to see him over other clients in the future. Most of these guys were family men, bored with their bedroom lives at home and looking for something different. I also saw some guys that were in their 20s and I think just did it for the sake of saying someday that they did it. I also saw quite a lot of weirdos, had to kick some people out of my house, or in one case ran out the door while putting my shirt on, and a good friend of mine who was working with me ran out behind me and dove into the car through a window, just trying to leave that guy's house as quickly as possible. I'm an actively working girl. My first time was only about a month ago. It was through a website where you make offers to pay a girl to go on a date with you. They had to be very clear that it wasn't a working girl website, the stipulations on the website being that you compensated for time. It went over this many times, but the doing of bedroom activities was fairly well implied. My first time was with a 43-year-old married man in town on business. He'd contacted me about a week prior through the website, offering $80 for a date. He said he'd give me $2,000 a month for regular fun if we liked each other. I said yes, and he told me which hotel to meet him at and when. He also told me what to wear. I arrived and he wasn't too bad looking, slender and way more tan than you normally see as far north as I live. He bought me a drink first at the hotel bar and we talked for a bit. I was unbelievably nervous, but he was fairly reassuring. I was sure everyone knew what I was there for and I was terrified of anyone calling me out. Eventually, he suggested we head up to his room and I gave the meekest, "Okay," that's ever passed my lips. We went up and sat on the bed and chatted a bit more before he kissed me. After a couple of seconds, he pulled back and said, "I like the way you do that. Let's take off your clothes and see what else you do well." I got undressed and gave him a down-under kiss. I wasn't really expecting him to finish that way, but he did. After he laid back on the bed and indicated that I should join him, we snuggled and talked for a bit more. Eventually, he told me that he thought I was funny and sweet and too good for that, and that he didn't want to see me again in case he formed an emotional attachment. He said he just wanted physical fulfillment, he didn't want to mess things up with his wife. I said that was fine and we talked some more. Eventually, I started putting my clothes back on. I was waiting for him to give me some money, but he wasn't making any moves in that direction, so I sat and talked with him a bit longer. Eventually, I reminded him that we agreed on $80 for the date, and he acted all surprised. Then he made a show of looking for his wallet and then counted out each bill and dropped it on the bed as he did. I took it and left, not accepting his offer to call me a cab. I felt pretty gross. My later experiences were better. Pretty sure the guy was baiting and switching, but offering $80 with the promise of $2,000 per month to lure people in. Then during the first date, he always says he has a change of heart. He did try to meet up again, but said he didn't want to pay for that. I don't know exactly what he was thinking with that, but I pretty much told him to F off. I don't remember much about the entire 6 or so years I was in the business. The whole reason I got into working as a call girl was because I have a traumatic brain injury that causes memory loss and dissociative episodes, and I wasn't receiving treatment for it at the time. Every day, all my life up until recently, has been a struggle to appear normal. There's only one job where you're only required to appear normal for 1 or 2 hours a day, and that's an escort service. Also, I grew up in a cult. My first job was a private client, and I was totally calm on my way there, and during, it wasn't until after I got into a cab to go home that I started crying. I wasn't even upset, it was just involuntary. A month later, I joined an agency. My first night they gave me this guy who became my first regular. He always booked half an hour, and I never stayed longer than 10 minutes. The other job of the night was in an office in an old industrial estate. 2 very married men and 1 other escort. She was really nice and reassuring, and helped me get over the initial embarrassment. The rest of the night was just sitting in the car with my driver, talking about World War II and listening to Frank Sinatra. Most of the time I even had fun, but I still always get butterflies on the drive there. I think it was the anticipation of not knowing who the guy was. They could be sincerely nice or they could be a complete jerk. A few people have been asking about my education. I'm a med student in one of the more expensive parts of London. UK student loans are based on household earnings. My family are quite wealthy, and I have a few pre-existing debts. That's why I needed to do this job. This is another somewhat enlightening angle that I might not have considered otherwise. On the whole, I think the UK system of student loans is one of the better options where it isn't free like in most parts of Europe, but people having this be something that people turn to as a result of the student loan system is a pretty damning indictment. Then again, I'm sure some people do it because it's fewer hours and more pay than some hospitality or other student jobs. So maybe there's an element of preference here too. This sounds awful, but I was so desperate for money that I posted on Craigslist. Obviously, that was stupid and dangerous, but I was 17 and I didn't think about that. I basically asked people to bid to see who I'd go with. Keep in mind, this was a suburb in the Midwestern US, so the money wasn't crazy. I ended up driving 45 minutes to meet a guy who then drove me to his house. Again, so stupid. I can't believe I didn't die that night. This guy was like 50, a heavy cigarette smoker, smelled like booze. I told him I was 19. Again, stupid. He paid me $60 an hour for 3 hours. He smoked a few bowls, talked about jazz, and then very creepily went on and on about my chest. I was impressed he could get things going down there with how much substances he was taking, and with how much of a frequent user he seemed to be in general. Maybe he was on something else. That's mostly what I was thinking about the whole time. I didn't feel it when he was done because I was too concerned trying to give a good performance. So awkward, but he didn't seem to notice. When I got off him, it seemed like he had shed his protection, and I freaked out until I realized it was still inside me. We hung out for a little while, he slept and I tried not to puke, and then he took me back to my car, filled up my tank and gave me $300. All in all, not a horrible first experience, but also not wonderful. He's called me a few times, but I never went back. Just after high school, my girlfriend got a job at a service. It was back when pages were cool, for reference. I dropped her off at work on her first night. The place was in a strip mall, just a little spot that looked like a half-empty travel agency or an insurance shop. It was out calls only, so you basically wouldn't know it was that sort of place. I hung out in town because she said she'd page me if she needed me to come get her. She paged me pretty quick. I picked her up and we drove to McDonald's and got coffee. She was a wreck. She said that she'd told them she was going on a break, but that she wanted me to take her home. She wasn't even going back to get paid. She went on an out call to a guy's house. They had bouncer-like guys to drive the girls places, and so a guy drove her to some guy's house and waited outside in the car. The customer obviously wanted to do the deed, and she was totally blindsided by that. I honestly don't think she knew she was that sort of worker. She thought she was going to be a go out on the town for a date kind of deal. She even wore one of her nicest dresses. Long story short, she ended up just watching the guy tickle his pickle before fleeing the place and getting driven back to the office. Then I picked her up and she never went back. The thing I remember most clearly was when she was describing it to me. She was disillusioned, incredulous. There were pictures of his wife on the walls, pictures of his family. She was a great girl. Years on, from what I know via Facebook, she went to university, traveled the world, has a beautiful family and a successful career. A happy ending, if you will. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I tried being a rent boy for about a week. The first time was when someone messaged me on Manhunt offering to go south of the border on me for $200, which sounded okay and is actually not too uncommon in the gay community. I went to some random hotel in Chelsea in New York City, and yeah, we did as we arranged. It wasn't too bad until the last person I ended up seeing, which creeped me out enough to end that career. I wasn't too grossed out much by anyone, but I had a hard time keeping myself going with that guy. So for this client, with the username Glowbed, I took a little blue pill right before getting there. After about half an hour of somewhat awkward conversation, he kept talking about his night in heaven, he took me up to his room. As soon as we got there, I started to get creeped out. He lived completely alone in a large apartment, but when we got to his bedroom door, the door had a large 4x4-inch expensive keypad lock with a number password. Why would someone need that on a bedroom where they bring rent boys in when they live completely alone? The next thing he did was shut the lights off and say, "Wanna know why they call me Glowbed?" and flipped a switch which turned on bright blue lights underneath his bed. I decided to just jet out of the apartment and take a subway home. No longer an escort, I only saw a few clients and decided I'd rather make money the normal way. But here's my first experience. Signed up to an escort and camgirl site. My partner couldn't accompany me to the meet, so I got my gay best friend to drive me. It was in a travel lodge. Classy, right? And I was super nervous. I'd asked him if there was anything in particular he wanted me to wear, and he said he wanted me in casual clothes and no makeup. Of course, guys don't really have a clue what girls look like without a stitch of makeup on, so I put on foundation, blush, and mascara, and a cute sundress. The guy was around 50, I was 20 at the time, and he mainly wanted to make out and cuddle. For some reason, he had covered himself in talcum powder, which was odd, and he wasn't attractive, which made it hard for me to get going properly, but he seemed happy. The thing that weirded me out a little was he kept talking about our age differences and asked for my real name several times. I had a fake name for obvious reasons. I was reluctant to give him my real name and instead just gave him another fake name. I told him my real name was Elizabeth, but my friends called me Lizzie, and he called me Lizzie for the remainder of that appointment. Then he had the cheek to try and haggle me down for an extra hour, which I declined. Afterwards, when I was 300 quid richer for an hour of work, I felt strangely empowered. That last bit is indeed something the narrator has heard before. I guess if this kind of thing is done correctly and safely, it can be a fulfilling job for some, at least for a small part of their lives. Or maybe there are people who do it for decades and never lose that sense of power. I couldn't say. My first time was like that feeling you get as a kid when you know you weren't supposed to be doing something, but you did it anyway. It was a scary thrill, which is actually why I believe most people do it. I was 22 and had just graduated with a Bachelor of Arts in a major that would make me no money. I'd moved in with my parents and was just on a downward spiral. I posted on Craigslist, $400 an hour. I had no clue about rates and still don't, but from this thread it seems high. I met a man the next night at his house for an agreed upon 30 minutes. We sat on the couch and talked a little bit. He ran a small business, divorced, overweight, 40s. Really ordinary and quite nice, actually. He took me into the bedroom and there were lit candles and a bottle of lubricant on the nightstand. I wouldn't kiss him for a while, but he seemed lonely, I guess. I eventually did, which was probably stupid. He put a Johnny on and I went south on him for a while, but he didn't keep things going consistently. I climbed on and rode him and he didn't get done by the time the 30 minutes were up. I liked him, so I kept going until he was done. Maybe another 20 minutes? I didn't charge him for the extra. I didn't enjoy it as much as I would with a regular partner, but it wasn't bad. After we finished, he thanked me and we hugged. He suggested the next time he make a spaghetti dinner and we could eat and get to know each other. It wasn't as bad as I'd expected and I wasn't mentally scarred, but I never did it again. I'm not sure why. He texted me several times after and eventually I told him I'd moved. Sorry for the stilted way of writing this, I've never told this to anyone before and it was kind of strange typing it all out. When I wasn't quite 20, I was tight on cash and decided, screw it, I needed a sugar daddy. I went on Craigslist and I found a guy. He wanted to meet me first and needed a new girl to replace his old one. He was willing to pay 4 figures per date. I drove to meet him and was stuck in traffic on the way for an hour or two. I sat at a Starbucks for a while waiting. He got lost because he was only there on a business trip. I was shaking by the time he came. We got burgers and drinks and sat at a table waiting for everything, talking. He was sweet, but not my type. I was so nervous and shaking. We got to this hotel and sat and talked and ate, then started getting frisky. He wouldn't stop talking about how amazing I looked and was, and I know he was trying to flatter me, but after a while it got really old. I stayed the night and left in the morning. He gave me money for gas. I later told him I was sorry, but the age difference felt too weird, and he'd have to find another girl. But really, I just couldn't stand him. Then I found this married guy. We talked, I sent him pictures of myself, and he was hooked. He ordered things off Amazon for me to bring, and yeah, we're talking about bedroom equipment stuff. Doing it in the rear was on the list of necessities to him. I was a virgin that way and really hesitant about it. I told him I wanted to be blindfolded for the thrill of it, but really, I just didn't want to see his face. Drove an hour to a motel in his town to see him. The way everyone looked at me, I knew they knew what I was there for. I knocked on the door, it opened. I stepped inside where the lights were off and kept my eyes on the ground. He came up to me and started stroking my arms, my face. He instructed me to put the blindfold on, and I did. I hated it. I hated every minute of it. Doing it that way sucked, and doing it with him sucked even more. He kissed me with his bushy beard tickling my face, and I frickin' hated it. I wanted to vomit. He gave me the $400 and I left. I regretted everything. Turns out he was nuts about me. He wanted to take me on trips and buy me an apartment in his town and all that stuff. I agreed to meet him again, but not doing it in the butt and no kissing. I told him it felt weird to kiss him when he had a wife. I know that's a weird frickin' thing for a working girl to say, but what was I supposed to say? You disgust me? The second time he was on white snow and had a hard time keeping things working down there. I had to awkwardly console him while he beat himself up over it and tried to restart him several times. We laid together for a while, and while we tried a few times, without a full rager, it's pretty much a fail. Once he gave up on the whole thing and admitted defeat, I packed everything up and sat on the edge of the bed. He bought my money and placed it in my hand and told me to look at him. I was still wearing the blindfold and I shook my head. He took it off me and told me to look at him. He was wearing a bandana that covered most of his face except his eyes. He had lovely eyes, and it made me want to cry when I thought of his wife. The guy was convinced that I wasn't in it for the money. I had a sick mind, a dirty side, and only he could fulfill it. I didn't bother correcting him because I didn't want to kill the self-esteem he was building back for himself. I told him I couldn't do it anymore. He messaged me a few times over the next year, but I kept telling him no matter what price he gave me. I regret both encounters to this day, and nobody knows about it. Gay man here. I remember the first time I accepted money for doing the deed with this guy. He messaged me on a gay dating site. This guy, 60-something years old, offered me $100 to give me a down-under kiss. I knew I was down immediately. I countered back that I'd do it for $150, and he had to let me watch adult films while he did it. He asked, "Can I swallow it?" Yeah, dude. So I went to his place. As a 28-year-old adult now, I think, what the frick, that guy could have been anyone. He could have taken me prisoner and now be wearing my skin like a dress. But he didn't do any of those things. He put on some adult films for me, which was very helpful as I wasn't attracted to him at all. I whipped it out, started tickling it, and once I was ready, he went to town until I was done. $150, thank you very much. He asked if I'd be willing to come again sometime. Yeah, duh. So I'd head over to his place about once a month. Got paid, repeat. When I moved away for college, I found some similar guys. Old men, fat men, especially ugly men. I never had to make them finish, they just wanted to do it for me. So that's what I sold them. A chance to make a hot young guy with a big eggplant arrive. Forgive the vulgarity. It was all about letting these guys dream that they'd gotten me without paying for me. I learned quickly that they were happier if I could make them feel like it wasn't an exchange. My favorite and fondest memory was one guy who didn't even want that. He wanted someone to cuddle with, rub against. We stayed in our undies. I actually felt sort of good about visiting him, because it didn't feel as gross. He just wanted human contact. And I gave it to him. For a price, but I gave it to him. Male escort here. First client was a 19-year-old, thin, yet very busty blonde white girl with braces. She wanted to experiment and get some practice on someone, so she gave me $100 and did everything imaginable to me. Kind of a win. And yeah, no, 8 times out of 10 as a male escort, you get men for clients. I've never known a purely straight male worker that, even if they accepted every job they were offered, made enough money to live on. A few times here and there for extra spending money, sure, but they never made enough money to pay the bills consistently. What are some of the worst things to happen to Chuck E. Cheese workers? Had a complaint that a kid was dipping toilet paper into the women's stalls and then eating it. And yep, he was. Same kid attacked me mercilessly while I was wearing the Rat in the Hat suit, all the time screaming, "Man in suit!" The best one was a complaint about the same kid eating from other families' tables. He was, and he looked them dead in the eyes while doing it. These were all on different occasions, by the way. Hey sir, someone left a whole bunch of brownies in the sky crawl. They weren't brownies. Cleaning throw-up out of the sky tubes. The smell was horrifying. Thank you, unnamed Chuck E. Cheese employee who saved naive, desperate for employment me by answering my question about employment with, "You don't want to work here. You're a hero." Anytime a kid threw up in the ball pit was an especially horrible day. There were several instances during the 6 years I'd worked there, but these times were quite memorable. There were 2 ways you could do this. A large, both sides opened cardboard box to cordon off the affected area, and saying it was a slow day and other kids weren't splashing all the balls around, we'd then put all of the cordon balls into a large netting bag so that we could gather them, take them outside, and they'd be sprayed off. Or there was the second way of cleaning. If the mess was all over the ball pit, then all of the balls had to be gathered, sprayed off, and the inside liner that held the balls had to be wiped down and cleaned. The only good thing about having to take all of them out was that you could find some pretty good stuff that happened to be in people's pockets and fell out, including money, pocket knives, and even rings. I worked at Chuck E. Cheese as my first job. On more than one occasion, kids went up into the sky netting, which was basically a bird nest made out of rope suspended in the air, and then they'd just empty their bowels on the poor souls below. After this happened a few times, we decided to move the carousel ride, which had a roof, under the bird nest, so at least it would just land on the roof and not someone's head and/or dinner. Yep, a kid I was training was leading me to a skee-ball machine that he just couldn't fix. He was probably 5 feet in front of me and walked under the net. All of a sudden, white stuff just fell and covered his head. Some little kid had stuck his face through the netting and just emptied down on him. I was set to go home right then, and his shift had just started. My boss was going to make him stay since I was going home. I told him to go home and shower and I'd stay on till he got back. Surprisingly, he actually came back. Yeah, although I couldn't say I'd be surprised at him choosing to opt out, what I will say is that your compassion probably went a long way towards retaining him. We've probably all worked jobs that sucked but were made bearable by our co-workers, and it sounds like you were doing your part in making his time there marginally less awful, which is something. Former employee, I worked 6 months in high school. First one, a family racked up a $300 bill and tried to pay for it with food stamps, and the time 2 families got into a fight during their kid's birthday party and had to be escorted out by the police. I later found one of their weaves on the table. The third time I got kicked in the crotch while in the Chuck E. Cheese suit. I'm a girl and it still hurt. Another little girl asked me when the real Chuck was going to come out because I was too short to be the real Chucky. And finally, a mum wanted to show her kid that under the costume I was just a real person and asked if I'd take off Chucky's head to show her daughter. I did, and the kid got even more freaked out, thinking that the mouse had engulfed me. I've repressed a lot of the memories, but this is the ones I can remember. I worked at Charles Entertainment Cheese for nearly 2 years during high school and then again later for 1 more year. The worst parts always had to do with the parents, of course. The one that sticks out in my head is the most super drunk, very unattractive older woman who'd just not quit hitting on me and then got way too handsy. It was just after I started. I spent the first few months there working the game room floor. This lady came up to me saying one of the machines was not giving out tickets and I needed to check it out for her. I sat down on the stool to open up the panel and check things out. During this time, she began rubbing my back, saying how cute I was and how much of a help I was being. It was about this time I realized she reeked of booze and was drunk. Next thing I knew, one of her hands was somewhere it shouldn't be, and she had found the prize she was after. I quickly sprang up from my seat, saying I had to get some tools from the back. I went and told the games manager what happened. I'm not really sure what happened after that, as I stayed in the back for a while. The next time I came back out, she was gone, thankfully. As a whole, I look back at my time working there with some fond memories. Our place was almost entirely staffed with high school or young college kids. Had a ton of great times there, and the pizza kicked butt. But yeah, cleaning crap out of the sky tube sucks. Oh, and I just remembered the craziest thing that happened while I worked there. Next door to us was the DMV, and one day a lady parked in the fire lane in front of it to help her elderly passenger inside find a seat. Well, in the time it took her to do that, a tow truck swooped in to tow her. This happened fairly frequently in our parking lot, so my coworker Buddy and I got closer to the glass at the front of the store to watch the shenanigans. The tow truck backed up right to the car, lifted the front end, and started pulling away with it. As the tow truck passed our window, we realized there were kids in the back seat. My buddy and I ran out the front doors of the store and started chasing after the guy, screaming about the kids. We finally caught up to him in the back of the parking lot where he'd usually secure the car to the truck before taking it back to the lot, and told him what he did. He just said, "Oh crap," dropped the car and took off. At this point, the mum of the kids had run to where we were at, understandably screaming about her babies. The cops were called, and since we knew which company the truck belonged to, the tow truck driver eventually showed back up. Not sure how much trouble the driver actually got in, but the cops were telling us that the law states that tow truck drivers must verify there are no passengers in the car before doing a snatch and grab. Adrenaline was definitely pumping with me and my coworkers for a while after that one. I have a good friend who used to work at Chuck E. Cheese. Him and his fellow co-workers conspired over the span of a few months to steal the various pieces of the suit. They'd claim that this part got ripped or some kid messed up this part and we had to throw it out, until they had a full suit. For what reason, you ask? Literally just to take turns showing up to parties in the full suit to make a bunch of drunk people super stoked. I remember when I worked at that absolute crap hole. I had to take out the coins from the machines and refill the tickets and clean them. The worst thing that happened wasn't the number 2 or throw up in the tubes above that the kids crawled in, but the time a kid apparently had to go boom boom, but didn't want to go to the bathroom because he'd lose all of his progress. So he just let it all out right where he was standing. I guess he was 3 tokens deep, so he committed to the game. Well, at one point, he lost and ran out of tokens. Guess what he does next? If you guessed walks away, leaving a mound of crap on the floor like it wasn't his, you're wrong. He frickin' grabbed said matter and just smeared it all over the machine like he was frosting a cake. Full-on tantrums while trying to talk smack, then just wiped his hands on the carpet. By the way, if you're thinking that turds are biohazard territory, you'd be a dummy to think that minimum wage workers aren't constantly required by managers to clean it up. This is correct. Sincerely, all other hospitality and gas station workers on the planet Earth. Says a lot about how we treat the bottom rung of society when we have to do the same job as a guy in hazmat gear. I worked there for only 4 months in high school before I quit. Everyone was required to wear the mouse costume. Kids would literally beat you up to get your attention. It sucked, because I went to a Catholic high school where we wore uniform skirts. Every Monday morning I'd go to the school covered in bruises. That must have raised a lot of questions about your home life, and one too many trips to the counselor's office. The worst part was wearing that rat suit after this one guy was in it. He took it seriously and would get up on the prize tables and get the kids to chant, "Chucky, Chucky." I could frickin' hear it back in the kitchen over the noise and music. The guy was completely undressed in the suit, and he sweat. A lot. I probably have hepatitis. Best part, though, was taking the leftover pizza dough into the back lot after closing and having a 1v1 deathmatch throwing softball-sized dough balls at each other's heads. Luckily, this one didn't happen to me, but somebody got shanked. We actually hired a bouncer on our busiest days because we attracted the trashiest people. There was also a ton of banging in the Chuck E. Cheese closet. This happened in the state of California, where servers still make minimum wage, not some $2.13 bullcrap. I was originally offered around $8.50, but that was retracted and I was paid $8 because I'd received tips, supposedly, which is what motivated me to beat the system. I worked at a Chuck E. Cheese in high school in a wealthy area, so I got the bright idea to neatly fold and rip the part of the bill that stated tips are included in the cost. Because they weren't. I got my co-workers in on it, and eventually we started presenting the bills to each other's parties and saying, if you'd like to tip your host, they can only accept cash, to plant the idea in the parents' head. One day, we got caught. I got blamed. I wasn't allowed to host parties anymore. Instead, the general manager hired his family and friends and allowed them to take advantage of my system. It was a goldmine, because sometimes I'd take home $200 in cash as a 16-year-old. I didn't even make that in 2 weekends of hourly pay. Not my story, but my dad's. This was decades ago. He worked as the man in the suit and all of his friends knew it. He had this one friend, we can call him Gene, who liked to take things over the top. He was working, and suddenly my dad hears a roar. He turns to see his buddy Gene sprinting at him full speed, no stop in sight. Boom! My dad is on the ground, head off, and the only thing heard was the screams of young children. My dad got fired that day. He told me that his boss thought it was a planned prank on the company. As much as my dad denied it, he couldn't keep himself from laughing. My dad was a known prankster anyways, so he just accepted it. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Former manager checking in from like 10 to 15 years ago. I have a few worsts. I'll divide them up below. The actual worst? The time a custody dispute carried into a birthday party for a 3-year-old. Multiple people had gats and knives, someone actually fired at the mother, and someone else tried to cut the father. This caused a full-on riot resulting in a lockdown. Luckily, we were very close to a police station and no one was seriously injured. The hilarious worst was 2 employees doing the deed in the Chuck E. closet, where employees could go change without being in the way of the kitchen or in sight of the children. The clincher was that one was wearing the Chuck E. Cheese head. This was bad because once the closet was unlocked and open, you were in sight, and we had lots of horrified parents and terrified children, and it was really hard not to laugh. The creepy worst was one of the animatronics failing and becoming possessed. We were about 2 weeks away from becoming a Stage 2 store, which was the next level of upgrades and improvements, including removing the animatronics. So they just told us to let it go and try to keep it in check. It sounded demonic and would just turn on at random. Like in the middle of the happy birthday song, its head caught a point that it couldn't turn anymore and got stuck moving a few inches back and forth and then caught on fire while trying to demonically still sing. And the sad worst. We all had to get background checks if we had not been employed for 30 days because of a manager in our district, but not from our store, who turned out to not be taking care of his dying mother for a month. He was actually in jail for a DUI. The area manager was concerned about what else they didn't know because he'd been with the company for like 25 years and worked up from a cashier. They ran a background check and he had multiple issues with the law. His family vacations were all timed with when he was in jail, and he was a registered unspeakable act offender. Not the worst, actually pretty good depending on your perspective. My dad used to manage one back in the mid-80s and would always go through the cash registers at the end of every night and trade in his own pocket change for all of the rare, vintage coinage that teenagers would steal from their parents' stashes. He amassed a great collection of silver coins and other discontinued currency. Mercury dimes, buffalo nickels, stuff like that. He still has all of it to this day. I was the technician at a Chuck E. Cheese in high school. One day I was covering someone and I had to wear the suit and do the show. On my way back to the room, a little kid ran up to see Chucky and stabbed me in the ankle with a pencil as hard as he could. I rushed into the back room and took off the pants portion of the suit, pulled down my sock and a bunch of blood poured out. Didn't even go home early, the boss just had me stand at the door. Charles Entertainment Cheese. You can lie down and dress your injuries when you're dead. Seriously, as crap as most minimum wage hospo jobs are, this particular chain does sound like it might be the worst one to work for. Like, I worked at McDonald's and this blows it out of the water. Am I wrong? Any positive experiences working with the rat in the comments? Former employee of 9 months. There was once a very old woman peeing on the carpet in the entrance while standing up. Also, cleaning pee out of the sky tubes after a complaint that it got in a kid's eyes and he couldn't see. Then there was walking into the bathroom to find an abandoned pair of undies with number 2 still in it. Took everything I had not to throw up while throwing it away. Also, while in the Chucky suit, being asked by a large black woman wearing all blue, "Why you got all that red on you?" And finally, asking a mute girl if she wanted to put candles on her cake and being told she can't talk by her parents. There were definitely many more less than enjoyable experiences, but these are the ones that stand out to me. So, to sum all these stories up, ball pits are nasty and you should watch out for crap and throw up in the high tubes. Not an employee, but one time as a very young kid, my older brother almost got lured out of the building by a stranger with the promise of a bunch of free tickets. I intervened and everything was fine, the employees were notified. Another time, the same kid almost got into a truck to help find a missing puppy. He was a very kidnappable kid, I guess, but I can't seem to get rid of his dumb idiot butt. Once I walked in on this 40-year-old man just giving his pickle a little tickle. Our eyes met and we kinda just stared at one another. Most awkward 10 seconds of my life. That damn suit. I was a game room technician. That part was awesome. I got to play games all day, fix coin jams. However, one day, before I was allowed to leave, they decided I had to wear the suit. This was 10 years ago, so it was before the redesign of Chuck E. Cheese. I'm 6 foot, and with the suits on, ears included, I was a giant. You can't really see in the damned thing. Anyways, they led me out into the main hall, and I was basically lumbering around. It's this horrible experience because I couldn't see. I kept bumping into things. You'd think this would be the worst part, but nope. It was the kids I scared. They counted. I made 7 children break down, scream, and bawl their eyes out. I felt like crap for it. Wasn't much that I could do, though. It got better. I finally got to take the suit off and left. I was walking to my car and this family was leaving. Their little boy was crying. I figured it was due to having to leave. Nope. He was just wailing because Chuck E. Cheese terrified him. The mum goes, "I've had it. You need to straighten up already. If you don't, I'll take you back in and feed you to that giant mouse." Worst experience. Another time we had these sketchy guys come in and try to rob us right before close. Our manager, let's call him O, decided he wasn't going to call the cops and he'd handle it himself. So he runs back to the kitchen, grabs a pizza cutter, which is basically a giant curved machete. He was trying to be all sneaky and kind of hide it by keeping it close to his leg. We all thought we were about to get shot because he wanted to play hero. The guys ended up fleeing, after seeing him with a giant blade, but it was a pretty terrifying experience for a young high school kid. Having to wear that costume, it's probably one of the most degrading things I've ever had to do. Having to clean the bathrooms, watching children open up the containers with cheese and lick them, and wondering how many times I've used condiments after children have licked them, catching strep throat several times, having a group of bored parents test the system of making sure the correct kid leaves with the correct parent. We don't usually check this because it would be obvious if you're taking the kid because the kid would be crying. That would usually be when I would check if the kid didn't look like the parent. Or having some lady accuse us of spraying Windex in the salad. Our manager told us we couldn't take sick days unless we had a doctor's note, which is against the law. Managers would scream and degrade us teenagers in front of whoever. Having to close at the end of the night because we'd basically be cleaning up after children. But yeah, having to deal with crappy parents. Having parents complain about our attitude because we don't want to be around their crappy kids. Having kids constantly running while you're trying to deliver a pizza. Wheelies. Having to clean the sky tubes after a kid unloaded in them. Having to work with teenagers who are not the nicest groups of people. Mothers dropping their children's diapers on the floor instead of the trash can. I've blocked the rest out. One time at Charles Entertainment Cheese when I was working there, some food fight broke out and one kid chucked his entire cake straight at Chucky, and then he cried out about how he didn't get a cake. The kid's mum went to the bathroom and she was in there for a good 15 minutes. I went in there to ask what was up and I saw her having a mental breakdown. Turns out she spent hours making that cake specially for him, and it was all ruined in about 30 seconds. You know what? After hearing all these, I'm going to be telling my son that he's lucky as crap that he got hired on at Domino's before Chuck E. Cheese got back to him. One time I saw two families going at it, throwing punches, cursing, and spitting because one of the kids took some tickets from one of the arcade games that didn't belong to him. Cops had to be called and both dads got arrested. Okay, this is wild. This is easily the third story I've heard about an all-out brawl happening at this chain. One of them I think I'd heard before I'd made this video. These places are more of a hotbed for human trash than cruise ships. That's right, you heard me. I've been at Chuck E. Cheese for 4 years. I'm a cashier and I remember I had a closing shift one night. Cashiers close down the cash area, salad bar, beverage bar, and restrooms, at least at my location. I usually leave the restrooms last, so on that night I'd finished up everything else and went to clean the restrooms. My locations are typically very clean, so I never had an issue with these, until that day. When I walked into the ladies' room, I saw what no employee wants to see in the restrooms. It was in the biggest stall, just imagine turds, but everywhere. On the walls, on the seat, on the floor, it was like semi-solid, almost liquid-like. On the floor near the drain was more. Imagine the emoji, but in real life. That's what was there. I remember a coworker came in and Snapchatted it for some reason. I have no idea how a human could have accomplished that. I called in my manager for backup. He came in and screamed. I screamed. Then we cleaned it up begrudgingly. I wore like 5 pairs of gloves at the same time. It took us far longer than usual. I wasn't happy to say the least. Luckily, it's never happened since. Nothing has ever been worse than that. In short, the big stall of the women's restroom, explosion of liquid-like crap everywhere. The real-life equivalent of the poopy emoji also makes an appearance. My manager and I scream in horror. This happened 15 years or so ago. I was designated to be the big cheese himself, a glorious honor. And the fact that I was one of the only guys that worked there meant that I was always the one chosen for that hot suit. This day, a football team was having a party there, 10 or 12-year-olds or something. My manager knew what was going to happen to me, though. My young, naive brain only had innocent thoughts about making the children happy. Then the coach playfully tosses me a football. At least it was in my limited field of vision, so I actually caught it. And it happened. A horde of 10-year-olds descended upon me in the cramped area between 2 long tables. Valiantly as I tried to keep my balance, these little demons proceeded to tackle me onto the ground. I thankfully didn't break anything and I kept my head from falling off while being knocked around, but I was angry. As soon as they got off me, I got up and left to go into the back and take off the Charles Entertainment Cheese outfit. Another time, the same manager as the last story made me work off the clock, but I was too young and dumb to document and report it. What did you do to get expelled from your college? I went to a private Christian university, and I have a friend who got expelled for supposedly exorcising a demon out of someone in the middle of a wide-open courtyard. I unintentionally got another student expelled. We were critiquing websites we had built when I noticed that one looked exactly like mine with a few tweaks. I popped open the source and noticed it was a line-for-line copy of my code with a few changes to the CSS. I brought it up to the professor to protect myself in case he noticed them, though I doubt I would have been suspected because mine was more cohesive. The changes he did make didn't make the site more appealing. Anyway, apparently it was his 3rd time plagiarizing. After 2 times, you go on trial with the school. If you don't get expelled then, a 3rd time is the nail in the coffin. I just spent too much time drinking and not going to class. I was a junior with a 1.6 overall GPA. The university said they didn't need my ilk around there and would open my spot for someone who would appreciate it. That got my attention. I went to the dean and talked with him for a couple of hours trying to get back in. He said, no, 19 out of 20 of you guys go back to doing the same thing. I told him I'd be the exception. He gave me another chance. From then on out, I was 4.0 every semester. I finally got my GPA up over 2.5 so I could graduate. I made sure I went back to the dean's office to thank him and tell him that I was the 1 out of the 20 that made it. Installing Bitcoin miners on all the computers in a video editing lab. Our professor explicitly warned us not to run Bitcoin miners on our university's high-performance cluster, as that would get you expelled. I highly suspect someone did exactly that the semester before us. For being off campus with a member of the opposite gender without proper supervision. No, seriously. A guy and a girl in my uni, which is located in a conservative country, were caught making out in the stairway. Both of them were legally adults. The girl's parents were called, they took her away, so technically not expelled, and got her married to another guy that she was already arranged for by them. The guy was transferred to a lesser-known college where he didn't perform well but landed a crappy job. Greetings, my fellow Indians. Man, that sucks no matter what culture it happens in. Honestly, people get enough moral policing when they're young in school. Adults don't need it when they move on to higher education. There might be personal reasons why hooking up maybe isn't the best idea, but these last examples feel like they shouldn't have been a thing. I was making a search engine for our school teacher evaluation page. It absolutely blew up in popularity and a large portion of the school was using it, about 5,000 views per day. Essentially, it was like Rate My Professors, except it used the evaluations that they forced students to do at the end of class, as data. I also added features that made it more desirable to students. It became so popular that it was showing up on the front page of Google for certain teacher names. Some of those teachers had low ratings and got really mad and complained. I'd unintentionally violated IP laws because the evaluations were under password protections and my site was not. The only reason I didn't get expelled was because the dean of my department had my back. He did research and concluded the information shouldn't have been private in the first place, then sent a public information request to make it so my project didn't break the law. I definitely had people asking for my expulsion for a scary amount of time though. I got thrown out after I graduated from a master's degree program. The teacher asked me out for drinks when I asked to talk about one of my papers. I turned him down. I had to take a class with him in my next-to-last semester, and he tried to throw me out for plagiarism. I tried to press harassment charges, and the ombudsman talked me out of it by saying I'd be stuck in his class if I pressed charges. The ombudsman asked to contact administrators at the school and urged me to get an incomplete in the guy's class and to just graduate next term. After graduation, I was getting ready to go on to job interviews and I received a letter telling me I have to enroll in 4 courses and get 4 A's to offset the F's this teacher in question wanted to give me. I followed up and the teacher, who is now the chair of the program, elects himself my academic advisor and takes over the situation. He fakes my grades and tells me I have 6 weeks to complete the entire course all over again. He tells me if I do my best, he'll make it possible to graduate as it's mathematically impossible. I can't complete the work in time and he throws me out. I'm given permission to reapply and soon it becomes apparent they're not going to let me in to fix the situation. I contact the graduate department and meet with their legal counsel. I show them the faked grades, explain the rule violations, and inform them of my having reported the guy. They tell me to try and work with the program again and they'll intervene. The program refuses any solution involving my readmission. The graduate dean allows me to file academic grievances and rules that there are a lot of things wrong, but then does nothing about them. He concludes by telling me I can either get readmitted or give a replacement course via transfer. I take the course and submit it. The graduate dean says they can't accept the course if I can't get enrolled. The dean rules the matter reviewed and closed. I sue the school alleging unjust enrichment. I provide all of the documents and records as it's all conducted via email and I have my student folder. These get certified via discovery. The school evokes sovereign immunity and says that since the fraud and negligence happened more than 2 years before I filed, they're immune to prosecutions. The judge agrees and I file an appeal. As of August of the year I wrote this, 2017, it will be 10 years. My roommate got expelled for basically never going to class, not even when there was an important exam. He spent all night smoking green herb with me and playing video games, not with me, and then slept all day until about 5 p.m. Like I'd wake up, go to my 8:30 lecture, get lunch, go to lab 2 to 5, then come back to my room and my roommate would still be sleeping. I found out the following summer that he'd gotten a letter from the university asking him not to come back. Last I heard from him, he'd enrolled at a commuter school where he made the dean's list. Expelled because my GPA dropped below the competitive level for the engineering school at my college. I was given the option of transferring to a different school. They recommended I go into the humanities or be expelled. Humanities, the ultimate engineering burn. I left with a 2.9 GPA. I needed to maintain a 3.25 in order to stay in the program I was in, as it was also providing a scholarship. I couldn't afford school without it. I went into HVAC in the trades with an emphasis on programming. Thankfully, I had a job from the previous summer that was willing to hire me on full-time before this happened. so I took the expulsion and went to work full-time. Since then, I've gotten my certifications and I work in the trades doing fairly well for myself, so yay? If people are genuinely curious, I highly recommend looking into the trades. Some people just aren't meant for university. I'm not saying they're not smart. For instance, I graduated high school valedictorian with a 4.45 GPA. Some brains just aren't set up to be learning in a desk for more than 4 years. There's a stigma that it's a lower-class job, but don't let that stop you. I paid off a lot of the student debt I had within a year and a half of working, and at 23 I'm looking to purchase my first house. The trades, assuming you get technical training or go into a highly sought-after trade, pay extremely well. I make a little over 48k a year after being in the trades for a little over 3 years, and that's still as an apprentice. And believe me, I'm not bashing the humanities one bit. My brother went that route and he's one of the most intelligent people I know. I just have a mechanically inclined mind, and it would have been wasted going that direction. I had a friend who skipped all classes and failed everything because all he wanted to do was play League of Legends. He got a warning that if he didn't get his grades up, he'd be suspended for a year. He got suspended. When he went back to school a year later, the same thing happened again. Now he can't go back to that college again. I mean, the narrator played so much StarCraft during his bachelor's degree first year, messed up his sleeping schedule, and still never managed to get even one of these warnings. And he's not even a very bright guy. So how much do you have to play to get summoned by the dean like this? Like, you're aware that you're taking out a loan to do this, right? Surely you can occasionally pull an all-nighter to panic write an essay like I did. Wasn't expelled, but damn near. Junior year, I took an elective class called Reading Fiction. Cool class, but the teacher was extremely strict and took the class very seriously. I'm okay at writing papers, and this class involved heavy essays about writing techniques, symbolism, foreshadowing, that kind of thing. We were assigned to read a book that I can't remember the name of, but I wasn't into it at all. I struggled to finish it and struggled even more to write a detailed paper on it. I slammed out the minimal page requirement and sources needed. It wasn't my best work, but it was serviceable. I get an email from the teacher a few days later saying he'd like me to come to his office. He accused me of plagiarizing certain segments of my paper, which I didn't, and was ready to send my case to the dean. Apparently some things I sourced in my paper were done incorrectly, which led him to believe I straight up copy and pasted from the internet. Second hour of office time was him passively-aggressively calling me an idiot. Currently I'm aware of a group of international students getting expelled from my school. They've been whispering to each other during exams in another language, and as luck would have it, my professor happens to speak that language and has slowly been building a case against them without their knowing. These kids somehow also got the solutions to every homework and exam last semester, which is very similar to what we've been assigned this semester. However, the kids are so frickin' lazy they blindly copy whole solutions, not realizing the numbers are different. Sometimes units are metric and they answer in English, and one problem asked for something completely different than they solved for using the exact procedure to solve last semester's homework. They're absolutely screwed, and I'm kind of excited to see it. One of them had a 3.7 GPA and was on the verge of being auto-admitted to a higher program. He's probably been cheating his whole college career. We're 2 semesters away from graduation. Plot twist, the advisor to that program is the instructor that's currently building the case against them. So basically, that one specific guy is mega screwed. Our professor is savage. He's been grading all of their homework and exams like everything was fine, and one day unleashed a dossier of justice to COAM. Late update for anyone interested in an update, COAM didn't actually expel anyone after all. They've just completely lost the homework portion of their grade, 20%, so they're probably all getting C's at best. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I'm bipolar. I rocked college and got straight A's while I was manic as crap sleeping 3 hours a night for several years, drinking, substances, partying, all the usuals. Then I curled up in a dark hole and cried for several months and couldn't even hardly wake up enough to go to any of my classes. Got academic probation and told my advisors that I had no idea what was happening to me. This wasn't the real me. I managed to pull off another year of straight A's and little to no sleep. Then I crashed again and did nothing but sleep for months at a time, wanting nothing more from life than for it to end. As soon as possible, please. By my own hand if necessary. This time I got kicked out completely. Fast forward a few more years of the mania and depression cycles, and it eventually got so bad that I stole a car while manic and drove 800 miles across the US on some paranoid delusional insanity. I thought I was phasing between alternate realities and the government was going to try and capture me and study me to see how I was doing it. Don't ask. Luckily, I ended up in the hospital instead of jail, and I got diagnosed, finally. Now I take a frick ton of medicine, and I'm not quite so crazy anymore. The end. I had a particularly rough semester and got a D in a class that I'd previously dropped after about a week the prior semester because my schedule was too busy then. Department rules say that you can't attempt a class for credit more than twice, including drops, so I got kicked out of my major. I was 14 hours away from graduation at the time. The academic advisor said I could either change my major, so basically start college all over again, or F off for a year and then come back on probation. So I guess I'm not expelled per se, but I'm taking an involuntary gap year. I went to college right after high school and didn't really have direction as to what I wanted to pursue for a career. I signed up for classes and went because I was told, "You're supposed to go to college and get a degree." I started to not care about school about 3 or 4 semesters in and stopped putting forth effort. I decided I'd rather work my job, drink with my friends, and play my favorite video games. My grades tanked, then I stopped going to finals and failed many courses. My university finally gave me a warning and then dismissed me. I spent a semester off before applying to the local community college down the road to pursue a career as an EMT. I found a passion for medicine and a desire to achieve something more than substances, video games, and a dead-end job. I repaired my GPA by getting an associate's degree in arts, a general AA, and then went back to the university that dismissed me. I eventually would graduate with a bachelor's degree in biochemistry and go on to medical school afterwards, where I'd finish that chapter and start my residency training in family medicine. I'm almost done with my intern year. When I was in college, I got suspended 3 times for bad grades. At one point, my GPA was 1.0. I finally got it together and graduated with a degree in finance, and a few years later went back and got a second bachelor's in accounting. I think my GPA is 3.2 now. I'm not working in finance or accounting because I can't find a job. I mostly just hate my life now and wish I hadn't wasted all that time. I shot a firework out of my butt in a campus-owned house. You know what? I'm reluctant to believe that and that alone was the cause of someone being thrown out of a university. Did he get warnings for a bunch of other crap like this first? I mean, it's dangerous and all, but I really hope we don't live in a world where a stalker can get one slap on the wrist for making someone's life a living hell at university, and you're out on the street with hundreds of thousands in loan debt for one scorched butthole. Failing grades, insane roommates, and theft accusations, I bombed out due to massive stress, appealed, and got back in. Okay, for a more serious and detailed response, I was going to the Art Institute of Philadelphia, one of the few places I legitimately consider hell on earth. The school paired me up with various roommates who had severe issues, like refusing to shower for 6 months straight, hardcore substance addicts, a guy who would just openly toss off to the most absurd and dark pictures you can imagine while I was still in the room with him. It was all nightmare fuel. The entire dorm was terrible. People were constantly kicking or punching body-sized holes into and through walls. Elevators would drop multiple floors when you were in them. It was a nightmare. And then one winter, a fire alarm started going off every single fricking night around 2 a.m., and we'd have to evac the building in the dead of winter. Nothing quite wakes you up like fire alarms and freezing cold. I mentally started to lose it. My grades dropped and I failed the semester because I could never sleep. Between the fire alarms and overwhelming funk, I was getting extremely worn down and stressed. This continued on. One of the deans calls on me one day and accuses me of credit card theft. According to the school, I'd stolen a credit card from one of my roommates and racked up a massive bill at Lane Bryant, and they had proof. Lane Bryant, which I didn't know at the time, was a women's clothing store that specialized in plus-size apparel. It was implied I was buying these for my girlfriend, but I had to point out to the school that I was gay. They changed their story to the fact that I must have been buying them for myself, implying I was a cross-dresser. I kinda lost it there and asked them to provide any shred of proof to back up their claims. They had none, but proceeded to attack me about this crap for weeks, demanding I pay back the money I never took or they'd have to escalate things. Then I ended up with a roommate who was caught growing substances, the fungal kind, in my closet. He got caught, but the school decided that chaperoning the guy was not their responsibility, and he ended up stealing half my crap, to which the school was like, "Did you have insurance? No? Haha, not our problem, please get out of my office." After that, everything tanked. The stress piled on and the plurality of crappiness that exuded from the school got to me, and I failed out. As I said, I was able to get appeal, get back in, and later graduate. As a bonus, a few semesters after all of this crap happened, the school paired me up with 2 roommates whose previous roommate pulled a weapon on them and threatened to kill them. The school moved the two guys into my room, and the guy who'd threatened them broke into our building and got into my apartment. That school was an absolute nightmare. I got expelled in 2004 for inciting a riot. Apparently you can get kicked out for not showing up to class and failing everything. Who knew? I knew a guy who got expelled from an Ivy League for getting caught with too much white snow. He works at California Pizza Kitchen now. Freshman year of engineering, and I was all of 3 months in. I'd invited the RA over to play some Halo. As he walked through the hall, he noticed my dorm neighbor had his door open with beer cans everywhere. He shook his head and reluctantly told me he couldn't game and has to write this guy up. The night after, I wake up to a loud knock on my door. Thinking it's some prankster, I mumbled, "F off, I'm sleeping." And then I heard my RA's voice say, "It's no joke, open up." Adrenaline kicks in and I bolted out of bed. It's the RA with 2 security guards. I was told that they were notified I'd made dangerous-sounding comments and had to search my room. They found a disassembled airsoft weapon, the battery and spring, that I was kind of taking apart, a length of rope and a standard toolbox and an electronics kit. This is where it got horrible. The length of rope was wrapped neatly around a water pipe in my room. It was black and purple, and my girlfriend at the time was way too into some alternative stuff, and I was too lazy to put it away. I should note I was just storing it on the pipe, not hanging someone from it. The security officers claimed it looked like a noose, despite no knots. The electronics kit they said looked like bomb parts, to which I gave them the exact name of the professor who was helping me with my project. They also took several of my tools from my toolbox. I was immediately marched to the security office at 2 a.m. to wait for my parents to pick me up. Talk about the worst car ride ever back home. I had no idea what happened, and I wanted to just throw myself out of the car. A day later, we went back to talk to the administration. It was recognized that I was thrown under the bus, but that was the extent of any sympathy given. I was faced with the choice of either a full semester suspension or to just leave and have any judicial records sealed. I chose the latter. That day, in front of half the dorm, my parents and I packed up the car and left. I was able to apply and get into a different school for the spring semester, though without the $35K scholarship I'd previously received. But I'm now an employed civil engineer and life's been going pretty well. Holy crud, these university administrations seem completely useless. What annoys me the most about this is that nobody even seemed to benefit from it. Why did the RA want you to get caught out and apparently fabricate something about you making dangerous comments? So much wasted and thrown away, and a committee completely unwilling to do anything to stop everything you had worked for being ruined. I'm glad that you ended up okay anyway. I was a friendless loser in high school and middle school, so I was very sensitive when I could tell someone else was bullied. There was a kid in my Spanish class who clearly had some spectrum-level stuff going on, and he'd ask really inappropriate questions, and everyone made fun of him, laughed at him, rolled their eyes, even the teacher. I felt bad for him. I asked him to work with me on a project, and I invited him to my dorm room. My roommate and his friends happened to be there and were smoking before heading out. He got all perturbed, and I ended up doing all of the work and letting him take credit because I felt bad. He decided to immediately go to campus security and report me for allowing illegal activities to go on. Me and my roommate and his friends all got arrested and taken away in cuffs and shackles in front of the entire student body. I then had to leave the school, and my family never recovered from the whole thing. My mother recently passed away, and this incident hurt our relationship for the remainder of her life. I was forced to take NA classes, and they asked me to leave since I'd never done any substances or drunk before college, and I was still in my first year. They just auto-passed me and expunged my record at least. I was in classes with people who had scars all over their bodies, arms ruined by substance injections, people who had problems with self-mutilation and other kinds of stuff, and I was just some 18-year-old goody-two-shoes nerd kid. I ended up having to spend a few months in a psych ward as well, since this incident made me deeply mentally unwell, since I lost my friends, my family, and my future. One mistake and it completely altered the course of my life. I was trying to help someone and they screwed me. Because of what this kid did, I never went out of my way to help anyone who was bullied, and I instantly assume that they frickin' deserve it now. I lost all the friends I made in college too. I'm completely friendless again, and I just have severe trust issues. This one happened to a teammate on my rowing team. He got busted for drinking, which isn't an expellable offense, but to get back at the RA that caught him, he crapped in a bag, went to the guy's first floor window, and threw it into his room. What made things worse is that the RA had a box fan in the window, and the crap hit it and sprayed everywhere in the room. Literally, the crap hit the fan. He was promptly expelled. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out easymode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.